Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon Planning and Highways Committee. I'm going to hand over to Abby for the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission. For example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abby. Now, for the benefit of the people who are viewing this meeting online, I'm going to go around the room and ask the members to introduce themselves. There are officers at this top table and they will help present reports and help the members come to a decision. But as we go around the room, I'll start at my right-hand side. Bob.
Councillor Bob McCann, Baton Ward.
Cliff.
Councillor Cliff Woodcraft, Fulwood Ward.
Councillor Barbara Masters, Ecclesall Ward.
Roger.
Roger Davis, Ecclesall Ward.
Sophie.
Councillor Sophie Wilson, Norfolk Park and Arbourthorne Ward.
Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Gary Weatherall, Shaggy and Brightside Ward.
Nigat.
Nigat Bashara, Councillor for Netherridge and Sherrill Ward.
Tony.
Tony down Southey Ward.
Councillor Tom Hunt, Councillor for Walkley Ward, and the substitute member today for Councillor Mike Chaplin, who's unwell.
Pete.
Peter Price, member for Shea Green Brightside.
And finally Henry.
Councillor Henry Nottage, substituting for Brian Holmshaw, and I'm member for Hillsborough Ward.
Thank you very much. Abby, we have some apologies for absence today.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Alan Woodcock and also from Councillor Mike Chaplin, whose sub is Tom Hunt, and Councillor Brian Holmshaw, whose sub is Henry Nottage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't believe we have any items that warrant the exclusion of public or press today. Can you confirm that? Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Abby. Does any member need to make any declaration of interest? Peter.
Yeah, just to say that I'm a member for Shea Green Brightside, which covers the planning application for the Outokumpu site. But I've had no consultation with anybody, not discussed it with anybody, so I'm completely independent. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Hiya.
Oh, sorry, Gary.
Same as Peter, Chair.
Thank you for that. We'll note both of those. No more declarations? Looking around the room, I can't see any. Next item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting that are in your pack between pages 9 and 14. So I will go through them and ask for matters of accuracy as I go through. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. And finally page 13. So can I take it that those are an accurate record of the last meeting? Okay, thank you. So straight on today to our first, oh, sorry, hang on just a sec. I've just been made aware, Gary, that you have made a public comment on the Outokumpu site. Could you clarify that for us, please?
No, I think officers better tell me what I've said then, Chair, because I can't remember saying out in public about this site.
Did you sign a petition?
No.
Page 149, apparently, of the pack. Please bear with us while we just sort this out. We don't want to jeopardise the validity of any decisions that we take today. So we just have to be careful when members are discussing them. Any comments, sir?
No, well, it says I did do it. I can't reckon out and the people that's on that list as well. I can't say that I have actually signed anyway, Chair.
Could we ask some advice, Vicky, in respect of that?
Thank you, Chair. It would appear that the planning officer has believes that Councillor Weatherall has commented on the application. So I would say, is that the final item on committee today? I will have a look at the information held on the planning record and see if I can find anything. In the absence of finding anything, I think in order to preserve the decision, I would recommend that Councillor Weatherall doesn't take part. But I will see if I can find something, because it would seem unusual if the planning officer's put on the report and there isn't any record of Councillor Weatherall being involved previously.
So, Gary, maybe it's an early bath. Okay. Right, the next item on the agenda is a site visit, and members will be aware that we've got a date held on the Monday morning before the next committee, and Abby will advise you of the meeting point for any site visits appropriate to next month's committee meeting. Thank you. Item 7 on the agenda, which was the proposed closure of a footpath linking Cobden View Road and Northfield Road, Crookes, has been withdrawn. That's because the objection which brought the item here has also been withdrawn, so it can now be dealt with as a delegated matter. So we proceed quite quickly on to item 8, which is a tree preservation order, number 461 at 3 Westbourne Road, Sheffield S10, and the report begins on page 33 of the agenda. Oh, sorry, I can't see you. You're on my right hand today, so if we hand it over, thank you very much.
Thank you. Tree Preservation Order number 461 was made on the 13th of October 22 to protect a mature lime tree which stands within the rear garden of 3 Westbourne Road. A copy of the order with its accompanying map can be found at Appendix A. The tree is within the Broomhill Conservation Area, so it is already protected to a limited extent by Section 211 of the Town and Country Planning Act. The tree was subject to a Section 211 notice received 29th of August 22 stating the landowner's intention to remove the tree. The notice was submitted following complaints from a neighbour of 461 Glossop Road, the rear of which is adjacent to the tree, stating the tree was large and oppressive. The tree was inspected on the 27th of September 22 with a view to determining if removal of the tree was appropriate. It was found to be a large diameter lime, in good health condition, barring a torn out limb to the south of the tree. The tree does overhang 461, but at height and doesn't touch the building or obstruct use of the garden. The tree has reasonable public visibility, standing in the easternmost portion of 3 Westbourne Road, where it is visible from properties on Westbourne Road, Glossop Road and Melbourne Avenue. The tree is partially visible from the public vantage point of Glossop Road, and images of the tree can be seen at Appendix C. The tree is of a species noted for its longevity, so it will contribute to the amenity of the area for some time to come. And finally, as it is within the Broomhill Conservation Area, an appraisal of which is included in Appendix D, the tree is noted as being a vital part of the conservation area's identity, enhancing the setting of buildings, softening the landscape and giving the area a sylvan feel. Using a tree evaluation for preservation orders assessment, the tree scored 15 points, which produced a clear recommendation for protection, and a summary of the tempo can be found at Appendix B. It was therefore deemed expedient in the interest of amenity to make the tree subject to a TPO, and there have been no duly received objections. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. Do I have any members' questions on this matter? Any members' comments? So I propose to move to the vote, and I will take a show of hands. All those in favour of confirming the tree preservation order number 461, please show. I think that was unanimous, Abby? Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So that item is concluded. Thank you very much for your time, Vanessa. And now we can move on to item 9 on the agenda, the applications under various acts and regulations. And we have 3 items to hear today. They begin in your pack on page 77. And the first application we have is application number 22/01978/REM, land at the junction with Carr Road and Hollin, Busk Lane, Sheffield 36. If you'd like to present your report, Sarah. Oh, we don't appear to have a signal. Alan, help. We can't see the officer. There we go. Right. It's now over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is a reserve matters application which seeks approval for 69 houses on a site at the junction of Hollin, Busk Lane and Carr Road. Outline planning permission was granted for up to 85 houses at public inquiry in 2021. All matters were reserved for subsequent approval except for access, which was approved at outline stage. So this application seeks the approval for the scale, layout, appearance and landscaping for the development. So this slide relates to the red line boundary for the site. So you can see it edged in red there, and it's located at the junction of Carr Road and Hollin, Busk Lane to the north of those highways. And it covers an area of 6.5 hectares. This slide shows the red line boundary from an aerial view. You can see that the site is formed of a number of fields which are delineated by dry stone walls, and you can just about make out the boundaries of those walls. The land falls to the north and is formed of grassy fields. There's residential development. Oh, sorry. The screen's gone blank again.
Sorry, we do appear to be having some technical issues today. Yeah, we're okay. At least on one.
On this one.
There we go. Back on both of them. We're back.
Okay, thank you. So there's residential development set to the south and the east of the site, and there's open fields to the west and the north. Fox Glen Wildlife Site is located to the north of the site, and you can make that out.
I do apologise. We don't normally have this many issues. We've obviously got a gremlin somewhere.
Do you want me to just move it on the laptop?
Is this the problem? Okay, let's try.
Okay, we're going to have to go back to a next slide, please, situation, because it might be the remote control.
So can we go back, please? And forward one. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So Fox Lane Wildlife Site is located to the north of the site, and you can make that out by where the trees are located to the top of the screen there. There's a group of buildings to the south of the site, to the north of Carr Road, but that's sort of cut out from the site, and that is, there's 3 dwellings there, and 2 of those are listed buildings. So moving on to the photographs, this is a view taken from Carr Road, looking north towards the site. The hedge that you can make out to the left of the screen is the boundary of the nearest listed building, and you can make out the dry stone wall there with the site beyond, and that is where the approximate location of where the site access will be formed. This is another view from Carr Road, but looking north, with the listed buildings just to the left of the screen there, again showing the boundary, which is a dry stone wall. So this is, again, another similar view, but taken standing closer to the site so that you can see into the site there, and you can make out that the site is set to grassy fields that are gently sloping down towards the north of the site. And again, the listed buildings, you can just about make out the hedge towards the left-hand side of the screen, and that's the boundary of the listed buildings. This is a view taken from Carr Road, but looking east towards the rear of the nearest property on Carr Road. And this is a view taken from the junction of Carr Road and Hollin Busk Lane. Again, you can see the field set there to grass and sloping down towards the north of the site. And this is a similar view taken from, again, from that junction of Hollin Busk Lane and Carr Road, but looking east into the site with Carr Road, the houses stepping down Carr Road to the right-hand side of the screen there. So this slide shows the site layout. You can see that vehicular access is taken from Carr Road to the northeast of the site. The road winds around the site in a sort of east to west direction, and that is the only vehicular access point into the site. The road, there's one main road through the site with small spurs off, which provide access to small groups of houses. Although although there's only one vehicular access point, there are 2 pedestrian access points into the site at either end of the residential development. So one located towards the northeast and one located towards the southwest of the site. The proposal is for 69 houses, which are a mixture of semi-detached and detached properties ranging from 1 bedrooms to 5 bedrooms, and there's 10% affordable housing, and that equates to 12 units. They are marked on the plans with a small red star, but you probably can't quite make that out from here, but they are pepper potted around the development in amongst the market housing. This slide shows the landscape proposals for the site. So you can see to the west of the screen, in the light green colour, that's an area of amenity grassland that's to be retained to the site. That equates to an area of 2.2 hectares, and it's undisturbed grassland to provide habitat for animals with no public access into that area.
We're just going to pause a moment for Sarah to collect her thoughts. Could I remind members and attendees, please, to switch their phones to silent mode or off in order to not interrupt or disturb the flow of the meeting, please. Are you okay?
Yeah. Sorry, can we go back one? Thank you. Sorry, still on this slide. So the area to the west is the undisturbed grassland habitat. And then you can make out that there's a large amount of public open space to be provided within the site itself. So to the north-east of the site, there's a suds basin proposed, and to the south-west of the site, there's an area of public open space with a children's playground in there. To the northern boundary of the site, there's also public space and landscaping adjacent to the local wildlife site, and that's to be supplemented with a range of planting, including trees and hedgerows and general landscaping. Dry stone walls are to be retained around the perimeter of the site, except for where the access is to be created. The dry stone walls that run through the site that separate the fields at present are also proposed to be retained, and there's 2 dry stone walls that cross the site from north to south, which are to be retained in situ, with green landscaping to either sides of those spaces, and that has a visual benefit and also a habitat benefit, because it allows green links through the site, which is encouraged for biodiversity and to provide a green link. And there's also a dry stone wall that runs east to west through the site, which is to be retained, and again it will have that standoff of landscaping to both sides, which provides that visual landscape link and the habitat as well. A small number of trees are proposed to be lost, largely around the site access where that's to be formed, but those are category C trees, and there's a large amount of trees proposed to be planted within the site. In terms of biodiversity, the calculations show that there will be an 81% net gain in biodiversity, plus 1 hedgerow unit, which equates to a 300% increase in hedgerow. So this slide shows some cross-sections through the site. The cross-section towards the top of the screen is taken through the site access. The second cross-section is taken along, it's a long section along the Spine Road, and the final section is taken on the group of buildings which back onto the listed buildings to the south of the site. You can see that the houses are generally 2 stories, some are 2.5 stories, so that means that they've got space in the roof space as well. Generally constructed from bricks with pitch tiled roofs. There are a number of stone buildings proposed, and they're just to the rear of the listed building, and that's to kind of soften that transition between the development and the listed buildings. So, as mentioned previously, outline planning permission was granted at appeal, and as part of that outline permission, a number of parameter plans were approved, and the applicant has submitted these drawings which illustrate how the parameter plans sit in the context of the development that's being brought forward today. So on this screen you can make out this, that the lighter yellowy green colours were the proposed residential areas, the darker green colours were the public open space areas, and the lighter green area was the amenity grassland. So you can see there, generally speaking, the layout and the land uses and the sort of residential areas versus the public open space areas are generally in accordance with the parameter plans. Another parameter plan which showed the movement through the site, so the dotted black line was the highway network as approved generally in accordance with the parameter plans. You can see that the layout generally follows the road layout there. This is a parameter plan showing the storey heights, so the orangey colour was where it was anticipated that dwellings would be at a slightly lower height, so up to 2 stories, and the yellow colours were where it was anticipated that they would be slightly higher, up to 2.5 stories, and the development has come forward in accordance with those plans. And finally, this was character areas, so the purple colours were where we would expect slightly lower density as sort of the rural edge of the development, and the bluer areas where we would expect slightly higher density as sort of the Spine Road character area. And again, the development has come forward in general accordance with those parameter plans. So to summarise, the principle of development has been established through the grant of outline planning approval at the public inquiry. The matters that are to be considered today relate to the scale, layout, appearance and landscaping of the scheme, and those matters are generally in accordance with the parameter plans approved at outline stage. If I could just draw members' attention to the supplementary report that's been prepared for this application. So firstly, there's an additional section which considers the heritage impact of the development. So as noted, there are 2 listed buildings just to the south of the site. The impact of those listed buildings was considered as part of the appeal, and the inspector held that the effect of the proposed development was mitigated by the inclusion of some open space to the rear of those listed buildings, by limiting the height of buildings to 2 stories adjacent to the heritage assets, and by incorporating landscaping along the boundaries. In line with that mitigation, the inspector concluded that there was less than substantial harm to the heritage assets, and that harm was outweighed by the public benefits. The Reserve Matters application is in accordance with the parameter plans, as mentioned, and it is in accordance with those parameter plans with regards to the impact on the heritage assets. And so it's concluded, again, that there's less than substantial harm in line with the MPPF on those heritage assets. There have also been 2 additional representations received, both from the same objector. I'll just run through those objections briefly and provide a brief response. So, firstly, the representation considers that the postcode is wrong for the site. It's proposed to put a directive on the application advising the applicant that a formal postal address should be given to the development, and advising them of who to contact to confirm the correct postal addresses. The representation also states that the officer's report is misleading in relation to ecology, and that the development fails to mitigate the substantial harm which would be caused to the adjacent local wildlife site, the Fox Glen area to the north of the site, and the wider strategic green network. The representation states that there's a failure to provide a 10 to 15 metre buffer zone along the boundary of the site with the local wildlife site, and that the estate road, which serves plots 9 to 13, which is to the north of the site, would be within that buffer zone, and that there would be a failure to provide a dark zone within that buffer zone. The inspector imposed conditions to prevent public access to Fox Glen, and the representation states that by incorporating the footpath in the Suds area into the north of the site, that there will be public access through to Fox Glen. In response to that, the planning inspector did not specifically impose a planning condition requiring a 10 to 15 metre wide buffer. As advised previously, condition 6 of the outline approval requires that any reserve matters application is designed in general accordance with the parameter plans, and the layout as shown here is in general accordance with those parameter plans in relation to the separation distance from the Fox Glen site to the north. The pedestrian route footpath around the site does not go into Fox Glen. It provides a route through from the properties to the north, around the Suds Basin, and then out of the development. And there's no intention to provide access into Fox Glen from the site. Condition 8 is replicated for reference, and that includes the requirement to prevent public access into Fox Glen through an appropriate boundary treatment, and that will be secured through that condition. The ecologist, the council's ecologist, has commented on these plans and states that although there is a relatively narrow buffer between the development and Fox Glen, that this is on balance considered to be acceptable. The area next to Fox Glen is a public driveway, so it's an open area of land, and that's considered to be preferable to having back gardens facing onto that area. And any lighting will be low-level bollards in that area, which will have a minimal impact on ecology and biodiversity. The representation goes on to state that the planning inspector was guided by the claimed benefits, which were supposed to result from the provision of 85 dwellings, and that as only 69 dwellings are proposed through this application, that the claimed benefits from as considered at the appeal are reduced because there's less houses. They also state that given that there's a shortage in the 5-year housing land supply, that we should be ensuring that development is built at an appropriate density. So the officer report does detail that the density of the development is less than the range set out in policy. It's 26 dwellings per hectare, as opposed to the requirement for 30 to 50 dwellings per hectare in these sorts of areas. but the policy does allow exceptions to be made where the development reflects the character of the area and is well designed. And in this instance, it's considered that the benefits of providing the public open space and the green links through the site are desirable and justify the lower density. The representation also states that the under-delivery of the number of houses on the site, so that's 69 instead of 85, as set out at the outline stage, will mean that there's less affordable houses provided on the site. The proposal is for 10% of gross internal floor area for affordable housing, which equates to 12 houses, and that's in accordance with the Section 106 agreement. The representations also state that when considered in conjunction with the development that was approved recently on another part of Hollin Busk, that the pressure on services, including school places and healthcare facilities, is increased. Looking at that in more detail, 69 dwellings are proposed here and 75 dwellings were approved at the last committee, and contributions are required for education when development is 500 houses or more, and for health contributions for sites of 1,000 dwellings or more. And finally, the representation states that questions whether the SUS drainage feature would be accessible and used for recreation purposes, such as swimming or as a paddling pool, and that it should be because it's open space, but the SUDS area is largely proposed as a drainage feature to ensure the site is suitably drained. It also brings about ecological benefits, and there's no intention for it to be used as a swimming pool or paddling pool, but there will still be benefits sort of visually from the public open space of that area.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah, for overcoming the technical issues as well. A complicated report. Now, I only have one speaker on to this application, and that's Katie Purdom. Katie, hello. If you'd like to come forward to one of the desks. Okay. Wonderful. Make yourself at home. The button, the console in front of you will turn the microphone on, and you have up to 5 minutes at your convenience.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Katie Purdom. I'm the Senior Planner from Stonebridge Homes. Stonebridge Homes is a Yorkshire-based house builder, and we've got a reputation for providing high-quality family homes. We endorse the Planning Officer's report and the conclusions drawn that the reserved matters application should be granted. We've worked closely with the council officers to ensure the proposals promote key concepts of good design and sustainability. We thank officers for working positively with us throughout the pre-application and reserved matters stages. As the officers' report notes, the principle of development, including the access onto Carr Road, has been established by the Outline Planning Permission. The impact on highways, drainage, ecology and other infrastructure has been considered and was subject to several planning obligations secured through a Section 106 agreement. As such, the reserved matters application considers the layout, appearance, scale and landscape only, and in providing this detail, we have fully considered the approach taken at outline stage, the outline planning conditions, as well as the relevant policies of Sheffield's adopted development plan and the local vernacular of Deep Carr. The result is a high-quality, attractive development that provides a wide variety of family homes, including 12 affordable homes, with generous green spaces and using a selection of materials which are consistent with and complement the local vernacular, including consideration for the listed buildings at Royd Farm. The open spaces include a network of native hedgerows and trees, amenity footpaths, equipped play provision, an outdoor library, seating areas, hedgehog highways, bird and bat boxes and more. There are also expanses of open space with restricted public access to preserve and enhance the ecological value at Fox Glen and on the large field to the west of the development. Together, these spaces provide recreation opportunities for existing and new residents and will also assist in encouraging habitat creation and providing biodiversity net gain. The sustainable drainage scheme, including the attenuation pond, will manage and restrict the flow of surface water from the site so it's directed to but doesn't overwhelm the existing watercourse and will not cause flooding off-site. It will therefore provide a betterment to the surface water runoff levels that have historically been experienced from this site. The houses themselves have been designed to maximise energy efficiency with enhanced building fabric. The homes will exceed the energy requirements set by outline condition 13 and will comply with the new building regulation Part L requirements. Each home will include an electric vehicle charging point as well, and further details provided in our energy statement which we've submitted under conditions. As well as affordable homes and equipped play area, the Section 106 secures the following financial contributions: a £27,000 contribution to local bus stop improvements, a £17,000 contribution to traffic signalling improvements at the Carr Road and Manchester Road, and a £10,000 contribution to associated traffic regulation order. The proposals will generate several other benefits, including employment and training opportunities during construction and the generation of additional expenditure in the area. We're committed to using local tradespeople during construction where possible and intend to source materials from a local quarry so that the benefits of the scheme are targeted as locally as possible. We value engagement and public consultation highly, and we submitted the draft layout to Sheffield Council as part of a pre-application inquiry in 2021, followed by a meeting with the planning officer. We arranged a public consultation at Stocksbridge Golf Club in December 2021 to discuss the draft proposals with residents and interested parties, and we also held a meeting with Stocksbridge Town Council to discuss these proposals. We collated and considered all comments received and incorporated the changes into our designs before formally submitting the reserved matters to the Council. We also set up a dedicated line of communication for residents to contact us directly with comments through the application process. Our public engagement has made us aware that several residents are keen to see new homes in Deep Carr so that families are able to stay within the area and the area can continue to thrive. We hope you agree that the proposals before you will provide a high quality and sustainable addition to Deep Carr, which will generate notable benefits and help underpin the success of the area. The design accords with the approved outline permission and Sheffield's local plan. The Council's officers as well as residents of Deep Carr have been consulted throughout the process and comments have been incorporated into the designs. There's also no outstanding consultee objections, and as such we ask that the reserved matters is approved today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katie. I'll now open the floor up to members' questions. Councillor Nottage.
Thank you for your representations. In terms of the division of the Section 106 obligations, you mentioned improvements to bus stops and temporary road traffic order and the road network. Are there no improvements in terms of enabling people who are going to live on this site to access the Upper Don Trail Trust and thence the rest of the city by an active travel network?
There's nothing in our Section 106.
I'm sorry,
Beyond scope
Henry.
of reserved matters.
No, the questions for members are not to the applicant, they are to the officers.
Apologies, Jeff.
Okay. If you'd like to have another go,
Same question.
Right.
To the officer.
Right.
There is a condition on the outline approval which requires a travel plan to be submitted, and that would include details of travel methods and potentially include sort of that kind of thing. No, and it's obviously a reserved matter, so we wouldn't be able to include that at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Did you need to come in on this, Helen, or are you satisfied with that?
Chair, no, I don't think so. I think, as Sarah said, we will cover it through the travel plan. The monies in Section 106 are actually for the operation of the highway network to mitigate any additional traffic flow resulting from this development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. I've got Councillor Davison. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Could you confirm that, as the inspector has said, that housing now can be built on this site, that cannot be overturned and that we are restricted in what we can say on this matter, i.e. Whether we think the building materials are adequate and whether, everything else in terms of the floods have been adequately dealt with.
Sarah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, outline planning permission has been granted, which establishes the principle of development. So the principle of building housing on this site has been established, and today we can only consider the layout, the scale, the appearance and the landscaping.
Does that answer your question, Roger? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Weatherall, Gary, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just, there's three little points I'd just like to bring up and get some clarity really on the 106 agreement. In my opinion, I think it's a bit weak. The affordable housing's very low. I'd like to get some feedback from officers. You touched on the flooding capacity on the site. You know, is that adequate? I know you put it down there, but is anything more we can do? Because we know what it's like for flooding. And it has been touched on about the buses. I mean, sustainable travel in that area now and the impact on bus cuts. We need to have more. I know there's something touched on about bus stops, but is anything more going into that? Thanks.
Sarah, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chair. So affordable housing, SUDs and sustainability and buses were all considered at the outline stage, and they're not matters which we can consider further as part of this application, which relates to the, as mentioned, the scale, the layout, the appearance and the landscaping.
Okay, thank you. Nigat, you wanted to ask a question.
Is it okay? It's just two points. One, just to get some clarification. The issue was raised around the loss of light and overshadowing, and obviously overlooking and loss of privacy. But I've noticed that you've already kind of like addressed this. Just some clarification, because again, just working, supporting families and stuff. This is one of the things when things are built up, and then having to deal with those is a knock-on effect on many existing residents. So I know you've mentioned, I quite like that you've looked into the well-being of and promoting health and well-being, making sure that it's safe and inclusive, and I think you've touched on it. If you can just say a little bit more how you actually make sure that that will not have a knock-on effect on those residents, existing residents, because they have actually raised it, that they feel that development will lead to loss of light and overshadowing and overlooking, because I have seen how that really, really impacts on people. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, you can see from the outline, from the layout, that the surrounding residential properties are all set away by decent distances, and those distances are in excess of our guidelines. So in terms of separation distances, distances between windows, they're all considered to be acceptable to ensure that there wouldn't be any overbearing or overshadowing impact to existing residents. Also within the site itself, there's decent separation distances between the dwellings, which would mean that future residents wouldn't experience overbearing or overshadowing or loss of privacy either.
Is that satisfactory? Okay. Well, I'll bring you back in afterwards because I've got Councillor Masters who wants to ask first question.
Thank you, Chair. It's really clarification, page 78 on other compliant conditions. It says sort of no extensions, porches, etc., without planning permission being obtained. But is that any different to what is normally required for any such extensions, swimming pools, porches, enclosures and fences? Is that over and above what's expected now on this application?
Thank you for that. So residential properties generally have something called permitted development rights, which means that they can build extensions without needing planning permission. So, for example, they could build a single-storey rear extension, they could put a low wall up, that kind of thing. So we have removed permitted development rights from all the properties within this site, and that's to make sure that, essentially, for a number of reasons. Because the plots, some of them have relatively small gardens, we want to make sure that the garden sizes are adequate. So it just gives us a bit more control over the future development on that site.
Thank you. But does it does it stand in perpetuity, or is it a case that's, because that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes these things can be overturned after, say, 5 years. Just wanted to make sure.
Yes, it's for the lifetime of the development.
Councillor Bashar, do you wanted another question?
Maybe it's answered in here. Just for understanding purposes, it's mentioned that development of this site and the wider area has previously been refused planning permission, and it's now been, further plans to develop. Is there any reason for that? Why it wasn't before? And
can you just refer me to what page you're looking at?
Page 84. It's under the summary of representations, and it's an issue raised.
So when the outline or application was originally submitted in 2017, that was refused by Planning Committee, and then that decision went to public inquiry, and it was allowed at inquiry. So that's what we're dealing with now. So that the decision was that it was granted, although members of committee did refuse it initially. It was granted at appeal.
Gary, Councillor Wetherall.
Thanks, Jay. Just a quick one, just on Barbara's question, really. Sarah said that you've took all planning application out for forever on this development. But I think the legal question maybe that government's already said that you can build a section, conservatory or whatever without any planning permission. Does that take away the people's rights on this side? Permitted development under Government Act.
So the wording of the condition, let me just check the wording of the condition. Bear with me a second. So the condition includes a clause that basically says that it refers to the current permitted development regime, but it also states any order revoking or reenacting that order, which essentially means any future versions of that order. This condition relates to that, so it will continue even if new regulations are brought in.
I'm still not very clear on that, Chair.
Councillor, we've got Vicky coming in here who will be able to clarify.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify and the position in respect of this condition. This condition is removing the permitted development rights. So, as the planning officer said, people do have some limited rights to do certain things without asking for planning permission first, and that's subject to things like the size of the proposed extensions, etc. So what we're doing here is we're removing those rights. So residents in the future, if they did want to make any amendments to the property, they would need to come and apply for planning permission, which would then be decided on the same basis as these applications today, possibly by delegated decision rather than to committee, depending on the issues at hand. But it's not to say that there's no future amendments to these properties. It's just that they would have to go through the application route as opposed to benefiting from permitted development rights. Does that clarify?
Do you need to come back, Gary?
I do, Chair, and I do apologise. It's just not sinking in. Just yes or no, I think the question is going to be, it's the government said that, people can build an extension on. So you're saying the Sheffield City Council can impose this bit of legislation and stop people from doing that, having an extension without going back.
Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is the legislation that says that people can do this, but we are able to remove those rights in certain circumstances, and that's what's been done here. We're removing those automatic rights, but of course we're not limiting people's ability to make those changes. They just got to go through a different process in order to get there. Thank you.
Okay. Smashing it. I can't see any more questions, so I will go to comments. Does any member have a comment? Councillor Price, Pete.
Just to say, Chair, I'm very disappointed in this application. It's a beautiful spot on the hill, visible to all the hills round about up at the north of the city. We turned it down when it last came to this committee for that very reason, and we've been overruled by the inspectorate, which has left us no option, really. I suppose the only satisfactory fact is that the number of properties have been reduced from 85 to 69, which makes it a little bit more pleasant. But I must admit, why it was never in the green belt, I'll never understand, because it's clearly part of that. But unfortunately, we're governed by the national rules, and the inspector, in his wisdom, decided to allow houses on here, and I think I've no option but to support the recommendation, Chairman. Got to get it off my chest.
And so you have, Councillor. Any more comments? Thank you very much for your patience with that. We appear to have resolved our technical issues. Councillor Woodcraft, Cliff, you wanted to
Thank you,
make a comment?
Chair. Yeah, so I think I share Peter Price's view about the loss of the green field, but that is something that's been and gone because of the outline planning permission. And that said, I think this proposed development has been done sensitively, and for that reason I shall be voting for it.
I can see no more indications of comments. So for that reason, I believe I'll go straight to the vote. So the officer recommendation on this reserve matters is to approve them conditionally. So I'll go around the room and ask members to indicate whether they are in favour of the officer recommendation or against. Councillor Nottage?
Approved with personal reservations.
Councillor Price?
Reluctantly approved, Chair.
Councillor Hunt?
Same, approve.
Councillor Dams?
Agree the officer's recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Basharat?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Wetherall?
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Wilson?
Same reservations as already been expressed by others, but approved.
Councillor Davison?
I think we echo the same things. In fact, I think the officers have done a good job on this, and I approve the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Masters?
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Woodcraft?
Yes, I'm for the officer's recommendation.
And finally, last but not least, Councillor McCann.
For the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. And that's a unanimous decision. So thank you very much for that. If you bear with us now, we're going to the next agenda, but we're going to move around the room slightly as officers come and go. So thank you for your contribution, Sarah. And we'll wait for our next officer to get in place. Lovely. So our next application is application number 22/01020, which is a full application for building between Cotton Street and 24 Alma Street, Sheffield S3. And Lucy is going to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this site, sorry, if we can move on to the next slide. So members obviously visited this site yesterday morning. So it's the last remaining element of a former workhouse and cotton mill within the Kelham Island Conservation Area. If we just move through these first few slides, that shows the red line boundary, so it's tightly around the building itself. And if we go on to the next slide, that's the aerial photograph. Things have moved on quite a bit since then. The members that visited the site will recognise that the site to the south has a lot of development activity on it. And the development that's been approved there is well underway. So there's a slide later on in the pack that shows the relationship to that development that's underway to the south. If we move on to the next slide, this really gives an overview of the building. So the slide on the top left, in fact the majority of slides on this show the rear southern elevation, with the exception of the top slide on the right hand side and the one below it. They show the front elevation to the street of this building. And then if we move on to the next slide, that shows the rear elevation. So members stood in a similar position yesterday to look at that, and then you can see obviously the new development on the right hand side there. And then if you move on to the next slide, that shows the entrance into the adjoining site between Globe Steelworks and the tall boundary wall. And then if you just move on to the next slide, that's looking back from somewhere around the entrance to the Kelham Island Museum estate, looking back along the terrace of properties. And then if you move on to the next one, that shows the relationship to another new building that is on the other side of Cotton Street. So that's just the very end of the terrace there on the right-hand side. And then if we leave it on that slide just for the moment, the next one along, that's the full terrace from the front, from Alma Street. So if we just leave it on that slide for the moment. So you'll see that it's a two-storey terrace. It was originally constructed of brick under a slate roof, but has undergone significant alteration, including this rendered finish on the building. The complex is believed to date back to around 1805, and approximately 40% of the floor space of the building is currently occupied by both a silversmith and a cabinet maker, with the remainder of the building empty. The application proposes the conversion and refurbishment of the building to form two bedroom houses and 12 one-bedroom houses in a terrace. And negotiations have taken place during the course of the application to ensure that the important elements of the building are retained. The building has recently been considered for its potential for listing, but the council has received confirmation from Historic England that the government has decided not to list the building. Notwithstanding this, the building is an unlisted heritage asset within the conservation area and must be assessed as such. And obviously the special interest of the Kelham Island Conservation Area is derived largely as a result of its significance as a key industrial area, historically associated with the city steel industry dating back as far as the late 17th century. So the key issues in this case are whether the proposal is acceptable in land use terms, the design of the alterations and their impact of the building on the building and the wider conservation area, the suitability of the living conditions created for new residents and the impact of the proposals on adjacent residents, as well as the highways implications. If we just move through the slides briefly, this shows the existing, on the top picture is the existing Alma Street elevation, the bottom picture is the existing rear elevation of the building. And if we move through the slides, this is the internal layout of the building as it stands, the ground floor and the first floor. And then if we just move through, this is the proposed Alma Street elevation on the top there, and then the proposed rear elevation. It's the rear elevation that has the most intervention in terms of alterations, although some of the window positions would be altered slightly on the front elevation and some windows would no longer be in use. And when you consider back to the photograph of the building, there are parts of the front elevation that don't have windows. So in order to make it suitable for conversion to residential, there do need to be some new windows inserted. If you just move to the next slide, that shows the west and the east elevation. So the west elevation is the one that's nearest to that very tall boundary wall. So there would be a new balcony, sort of terrace erected above a new building that would accommodate bin and bike storage below, but would be hidden from the Alma Street elevation by that large wall. So that would serve one of the biggest two-bedroom property. So that would have its own individual terrace. The east elevation faces directly onto Cotton Street, so there's a new window insertion into that elevation, and that's opposite that new building that you saw being constructed. On that next slide, if we just leave it on that slide for the moment, that shows the relationship to the properties that are being built to the south. And those properties, it's the end, sort of gable end of those properties that face the rear of the houses. In terms of land use, the core strategy identifies the area as one where manufacturing industry should be encouraged to relocate, and it's an area where the focus is on delivering new housing. These policies supersede the UDP designation, which was general industry. And obviously the new policies must be given significant weight, and that's especially in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework, which has an objective of significantly boosting the supply of new homes. Obviously the concerns of the existing businesses in the building and expressed by numerous objectors are noted and understood, but the planning system does not control tenancy arrangements. These buildings are privately owned, so the council also has no landlord influence in this case. What the council can obviously do outside the planning process is to offer support through its Business Sheffield arm. In terms of design and heritage, the design amendments that have been achieved through the course of the application has been in quite a long time as a result of this, have achieved a rationalisation of the number of windows that are proposed to be repositioned. We've fought hard to retain the rooftop chimneys, so the original rooftop chimneys, because that's a key consideration in heritage terms. The installation of timber windows where metal windows were proposed originally, re-roofing the building in natural slate, and also ensuring control over the render specification, because there would be a new render attached, but we need to make sure that that isn't a kind of modern and crisp appearance. It needs to be more akin to the heritage asset that it's going to be applied to. So that issue would be controlled by condition. Whilst we accept that the proposals will result in some harm to the significance of the building and the wider heritage asset of the conservation area, we've adjudged that to be less than substantial. So that's in conjunction with our conservation officer at the council. And obviously with that harm, that has to be outweighed by clear benefits. And we believe that the clear benefits are securing a long-term viable use for the building and delivering much needed additional housing at a time when the council clearly does not have a 5-year housing supply. The supply we have at the moment is 3.63 years, so we're significantly below the government requirement at the moment. In terms of living conditions, all of the houses meet the minimum space standards, which are defined in the South Yorkshire Residential Design Guide, and they all have dual aspects. So if you see on this plan, they're proper terraced houses, so they can look at both across the street and at the back. And quite unusually in this case, the view across Alma Street is very wide, and obviously the members that went on the visit yesterday will have seen that there's a lot of space at the front. So while there are some restrictions to the rear because of the proximity of the new buildings, it's not window to windows distance, because they are the end gables of those properties at the rear, but they also have outlook to the front. So we think that is a suitable compromise. The houses will also be well insulated and have solar panels on the roof, so obviously further adding to their attractiveness and to the long-term livability in terms of keeping costs down for future occupiers. In terms of highways, the houses are car-free. There isn't any space to accommodate parking on site. As you can see, it's tightly constrained. It's an existing building without any space, so all there is really is a walkway at the back to enter the properties. A secure bike storage area is provided, as I described earlier, to the left-hand side of that plan as we look at it. And the site is obviously in a very sustainable location, close to high-frequency bus transport routes and the tram, and also in very close walking distance to the city centre as well. So in terms of the benefits of the proposal, there would be 14 dwellings with good quality space standards. It would contribute to the vision of the neighbourhood, which is set out in the city centre strategic vision. It would secure the long-term use of the building, which is in a fairly poor state, and it's in a prominent location in the conservation area. Obviously, it's a very sustainable location. Residents would generate spend in the economy, and there would also be employment during the construction phase. Obviously, there are some disbenefits in terms of the lack of amenity space and car parking, but the benefits that accrue do outweigh those disbenefits in our opinion. There is a supplementary report, Chair. That's report number 2 on your papers. So, in terms of page, there's a couple of clarifications. Second paragraph on page 125. So we said that residents of the scheme are unlikely to be able to secure a parking permit in the parking scheme. So what we're actually saying is that they wouldn't be able to obtain a standard residential permit, but there may be exceptions for people with disabilities, etc. So that's just a slight rewording of that paragraph. And just to clarify, the legal agreement is still being drafted. So this recommendation is subject to the completion of that legal agreement. On page 130, it refers to one of the benefits being 14 new residential units being affordable. They're not affordable units, Chair. I apologise for that slight typo. It's 14 new residential units, so it does address the citywide need in terms of a lack of 5-year housing supply, but they're not affordable units. And the number of residential units means that policy is not triggered, and it does explain that in the report. A couple of additional conditions, Chair. One of them, the first one, is in relation to making sure that we've got a proper strategy for retaining the chimneys in terms of the structural integrity, because the intention is that the chimney breasts below the chimney pots on the roof would be removed. So we need to be certain that that is achievable structurally before we allow that to happen. So that's just to make sure that the roofscape of the building is protected. And also, I noted that there wasn't a condition that sought the long-term treatment and maintenance of the high boundary wall that we all witnessed on site yesterday as well. So I'm proposing a condition to rectify that and to make sure we have a long-term management arrangement for that tall boundary wall. Chair, I think that's where I'll leave it for now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I have 2 speakers to this application, both of whom wish to object. So I'm going to ask you in turn to come up to the one of the central desks. First of all, I have Mr. Christopher Perry. Christopher, if you'd like to come forward to one of the desks, the button on the console will allow you to connect to the microphone system, and you have up to 5 minutes at your convenience.
Does that mean we're running? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Christopher Perry, a silversmith based at the property you're discussing today. The area around Kelham and Shalesmoor has been a centre of silversmithing and Sheffield metalworking industries for a couple of centuries. My family business was invited to move to this location on Alma Street in the year 2000. The council gave my father a small grant to help with his moving costs, enticing him as a silversmith business back into Kelham. The council was looking to encourage small and creative and craft businesses to go to Kelham. Both my parents and colleague Eric trained at James Dixon's and Sons on Green Lane in Kelham Island. For 23 years we've been based on Alma Street, and when we first moved in the area, it was run down, and the positioning of a business like ours helped to improve Kelham and encourage employment within the area. Now my business is the last silversmithing and fine metalworking business within Kelham Island. I still work with traditional tools and techniques and skills handed down from former generations of Kelham silversmiths, from master to apprentice. The building that I occupy is within the Industrial Heritage Conservation Area of Kelham Island, which was created by the council in 1985. Now, I cannot remember the exact date, but I remember the day. A few years after moving in, a letter arrived from the council outlining a plan to develop from Sheffield University roundabout down to the River Don. My father was furious. Having just moved in, we were now told, but now this is my cross to bear. The city has changed, the area has changed, and the problem is you're about to remove, through granting of this planning permission, over 200 years of continuation of silversmithing and metalwork from the Kelham Island area. The problem throughout this changing city, where small companies are pushed out and closed down due to property owners selling to developers to change the buildings to rental and owner-occupied apartments, cashing in on the historic character of the city built on its metalworking wealth. Who am I? Our business brings considerable and prestigious work to Sheffield. Designs that I have created within that Kelham Island workshop are housed in the Millennium Gallery in Sheffield, the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths Collection, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In the last 12 months, we've exported to the US, Bermuda, Bahrain, and European countries. It will cost us tens of thousands of pounds to move our heavy and centuries-old specialist metalworking equipment. And to what guarantee do we have that the next location within the city of Sheffield will not be deemed suitable for a residential living area too, and we will be pushed out again? This is the second time this has happened to us, and it feels there is no longer an area designated to our profession that helped to build Sheffield. I suppose my argument is, what is an industrial conservation area of Kelham Island, and who and what is it designed to protect? I feel myself and my business and the people that work with me are part of that conservation of Kelham's industrial past. Our building and its chimney pots do not make the conservation area valid to me. The people working within it and their unique skills and techniques that have been handed down over generations do. And just one last point. I've been in discussion with, I've had several meetings with Kim Streets, the Chief Executive of Sheffield Museums Trust, about the possibility of moving our business within to Kelham Island Museum. Why does she feel what I do and what my business does is valid to an industrial heritage museum?
Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Perry. I have another speaker who wishes to object, and Elsa Greaves. Elsa, if you'd like to come forward to one of the consoles. The button on the console connects you to the webcasting system and the microphone, and you have up to 5 minutes at your convenience. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Kelham Island Industrial Conservation Area is nationally important. It is one of only 3 conservation areas nationally with industrial in their names. It's one of the first conservation areas designated by Sheffield in 1985, and they are very rare. Industry and industrial buildings in particular are central to the history and character that make Kelham nationally important. The Alma Street building is the earliest known building in the area and is Sheffield's working history in a nutshell. It is also the heritage of the very poorest and most vulnerable in our society, a reminder of social injustice. This fragile heritage is often overlooked and lost. Alma Street played a major part in the lives and destinies of ordinary Sheffielders and deserves better treatment now. Part of it may date from when Sheffield's only cotton mill was rebuilt in 1792 after a disastrous fire. It survived another mill fire in 1810, and then in 1829 became part of the Sheffield Workhouse, along with the huge 6-storey mill building now demolished. Partly rebuilt in 1850,
The building is little changed since then. The workhouse was used as a cholera hospital during the 1832 epidemic and as a morgue for victims of the great 1864 flood. Ibbotson Brothers took over the entire site when the workhouse moved to Fir Vale. They called it Globe Steel Works, after their old home at Globe Works on Penistone Road, where their notorious anti-union stance made them an early target of the Sheffield outrages. The main building went in 1947. Alma Street is all that is left. It's not only the last substantial remnant of our textile industry, but also of our earliest surviving workhouse building. It played a role in recovery from two of our greatest catastrophes and is connected with the struggles surrounding our early trades unions. It was central to decades of steel production and still houses skilled artisans practicing traditional Sheffield crafts today. Changes to doors and windows will destroy architectural features such as arches and sills, with Juliet balconies carved out, which is about as much out of character in an industrial area as it is possible to get. As for the chimneys, the drawings appear to show that they are to be demolished inside the building, leaving them poking out of the roof with no visible means of support. When asked last week exactly what was proposed here, officers were unable to confirm either way. Chimneys are a defining feature of historic industrial buildings inside and out, and I'm sure members of the committee will recall the mess that was made of the Pepper Pot building in Pinston Street over a similar confusion, resulting in inappropriate plastic chimneys and chimney stacks being installed. Removing Alma Street's chimneys would utterly wreck the interior character of this important non-designated heritage asset. In any case, is a proposal so ill-defined really fit to be determined today? The applicant has incorrectly claimed that the building is vacant. This is not true, as two traditional Sheffield businesses, silverware and cabinet making, we understand, are still working there. Eviction would add to decimation of industry. The building is more suited for use as artisan workshops or live-work units, not gentrification. The damage to its character scarcely justifies the small public benefit of a few more homes, and the eviction of the two traditional businesses flies in the face of the Council resolution of the 1st of June 2022 to use heritage to support local businesses, and we ask, therefore, that members of this committee refuse permission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your contribution, Ms. Graves. Lucy, would you like to respond to those comments, please?
Chair, I think in my opening address I responded to some of those comments. I completely empathise with existing businesses that are in the building. There's absolutely no question about that, Chair. But obviously the planning system is not dealing with matters of tenancy. It's dealing with matters of buildings. So it's the application before you. So we can't actually control. So even if you made a decision today to reject the proposal, that isn't a guarantee that those tenants would be able to remain in that property, because that's not something the council control. We don't own the building. Obviously, as I said, we can offer support through other means. In terms of the heritage designation of the conservation area, clearly the industrial heritage designation is a really important one, and it is nationally important. Obviously, I agree with all of those comments, but it was a way of being able to protect those important buildings and to stop them from being demolished in the early days. So that doesn't mean that the buildings can't be converted to other uses. Obviously, the exterior of the buildings is particularly important. I think a lot has been made of the interior details of buildings, but this building is not a listed building. So while one of the conditions is about a written scheme of investigation in archaeological terms to record the details of the building, so that all the historic details would be recorded for future generations to enjoy. But one of the other things that you have to consider is the longevity of the building and making sure that it is in a viable economic use for the long term, and protecting its fabric in the long term. We accept what's been said about the chimneys and in terms of the chimney breasts through the building, so the concern expressed about demolishing those breasts and how the chimneys on the rooftops would be retained. So that's why we've asked for an additional condition to address that specific issue. I accept what has been said about the Pepperbot building in the city centre and the problems we had with those. Those are substantially bigger chimneys. Obviously, they're enormous chimneys compared to these particular ones, but we appreciate that point that structurally we need to understand how those chimneys are to be supported if the breasts below them get removed. In terms of the applicant incorrectly claiming that the buildings were vacant, we've clarified in that in the report that isn't correct and they are not vacant. There's about 40% of the buildings in use at the moment. I'm not clear that I can really respond to anything else because a lot of it is about the loss of the business, which I completely understand. And I think we've made the argument in the planning case officer's report as to why we think the benefits outweigh the disbenefits, but the actual businesses themselves, in terms of the tenancies, we're not able to protect as part of this planning process.
Okay, thank you for that, Lucy. Do I have any members' questions? You wanted to come in here?
Sorry, Chair. I'm aware that a member did leave the room while the planning officer was giving her presentation. Can I just remind members of the rules regarding that if somebody does leave during the consideration of an item, they're not able to take part in the process? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. I did make a note that Councillor Masters left the room.
Outside the door because I couldn't stop coughing inside. That doesn't count, I presume. And I stood in the doorway afterwards.
Chair, can I just read out from the guidance note regarding planning meetings? It says at 10.5, members leaving the room during consideration of an item cannot thereafter take part in the decision on that item upon their return, as they cannot be seen to be in full possession of the information required to make that determination and may have been influenced by events occurring outside the committee during their absence. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything beyond that, Barbara. You may have just been outside, but you cannot be seen to be demonstrably in the room and in possession of all the information. I do apologise, but...
Next time I'll cough and drown proceedings. Thank you.
Well, it would be just one more slightly technical issue that we've had to cope with today. Thank you for that, Vicky. I am going to open the floor up to members' questions now. Councillor Nottage.
Thank you, Chair. Got a few questions, I'm afraid. In terms of the consultation, as well as one of the objectors thinking that people had been informed that the building was empty, Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group were also under the impression that it was empty, and another objector has mentioned that the building was vacant. When the consultation was carried out, was everyone clear that the building was occupied and in use?
Lucy?
Chair, as officers, we certainly were. We were aware it was in use. So in terms of the decision making, we were certainly aware it was in use, yes.
Okay, grand. Do you want me to carry on with my questions? Or
please do. Yeah.
In terms of parking, we've had other developments, thinking particularly of one on Little London Road, where the intention was that people moving into those developments wouldn't own cars and the lack of parking wouldn't be an issue. And given that these flats are, not affordable as described, I find it very unlikely that the people moving into them would not be minded to own a car at the moment. Is there anything else we can do to prevent parking being a problem? Because there is not space for 14 parking spaces.
I'm going to call Helen in here, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously there will be a permit scheme in the area, which is the same, residents won't be eligible for permits. Where there are permit schemes, the areas which are suitable to park in are available. the areas where there are likely to be problems by on-street parking will be covered by traffic regulation orders to prevent that. I mean, as I say, it is an area where there are existing car-free developments and an area where we would consider car-free developments to be appropriate because of the accessibility, the good accessibility to public transport and being within a walkable distance to the city centre. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. I hope we reach a point where we're less dependent on private car ownership. I'm not sure we're there yet. And my last question, in terms of the relocation of industries, it says in the city centre vision that the heritage of Kelham Island is going to be maintained through design of the buildings rather than the use. But it does allude to an area around Burton Street as being more suitable for maintaining a living heritage of makers. I share Mr Perry's concerns that should they relocate, the creeping tide of gentrification will then move down into Neepsend. Is there anything that the council is planning to do to create a designated area that there will be for general industrial, light industrial in that area?
Lucy,
Chair, I think the most important thing to consider obviously is the new local plan. Obviously the unity development plan and the core strategy are very much out of date, but the local plan is out for consultation until the 20th of February, and that has specific designations for industrial areas and residential areas. So that has taken account of the industrial land availability survey, which shows how much industry is needed in comparison to how much housing is needed. So that is very much intended to solve that problem and to have designated areas for those uses. I think what we're struggling with at the moment is that the plans are very much out of date that we're dealing with at the moment.
I now have Councillor Bashart. Niggott.
Yeah, I think mine was questions were similar because it's quite concerning, especially. I mean, that was the first thing that I looked at, the livelihood and these long-term small businesses running there, and then having these developments and what will be put in place as safeguarding for them. One, obviously, just listening to that in more detail, I totally sympathise, and I just feel, is there anything that can be put in place to make sure that the long existing tenants and the businesses, which I'm hearing now, is that it's not just a few, but they are well established and being used as well. What can be put in place to make sure that we don't lose these? And I'm going to throw this in because I feel strongly about that, because the cost of living at the moment and everything that we're all having to face, and especially businesses, I think it's just being mindful that, you know, whatever is being developed and put in is making sure that we're being fair to these long-term businesses as well, which the knock-on effect, which may not come across, but it can be huge, which we're already seeing across Sheffield. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Lucy?
Chair, obviously we're not denying that this is a problem. One of the things that I personally did as soon as the agenda had been published was to put one of the speakers in touch with Business Sheffield. That's one of the things that we could do. I didn't want to do that until the agenda had been published because it would be presupposing what our recommendation might be. So that is one angle that the council can help with these businesses. But this sort of thing happens in a cyclical fashion, if you like, because obviously in terms of the core strategy policy, it does clearly say that these types of areas in the city centre are no longer really suited to business type uses. So there is a gradual transition to housing. We've got a problem whereby we need to, over the course of the next 15 years, deliver 20,000 new homes in and around the city centre. So there is always going to be this conflict. There always has been this conflict. That's the main thing that I was able to do, was put Business Sheffield in touch. I completely, as I say, empathise and sympathise with the position of the current business. That's without question, as we all do. But that's the only thing that I can think of to put in place personally.
And I have an indication from Councillor Price. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Can you just clarify, I should know this, in the new plan that's going through for conservation, is there an area of Kelham that's designated for some of these traditional industries? I mean, there's industry and industry, isn't there? I mean, we've got a small silversmith who's been there for yonks. Is there any place being dedicated for that type of industry to continue somewhere else in the valley?
Chair, sorry, I haven't got it in front of me, the new plan. I'd have to examine the plan to have a look at it, so I can't give you a definitive answer, I'm afraid, without looking at the plan, which I haven't got in front of me at the moment.
I have a question from Councillor Hunt. Tom?
Thanks, Chair. Sheffield Conservation Advisory Group, the name does what it suggests. They advise us on conservation matters. They've suggested that no decision should be taken until a full heritage assessment is completed. You've touched upon a lot of the assessment of the heritage value of the site that's been taken, but has a specific heritage assessment as asked for by the advisory group been conducted?
Chair, there is a heritage statement with the application. I have to say it's not a very good one, and we fully accept that it definitely is not up to the standard that we would normally accept, and since the submission of this application we've improved that, but obviously we fully consult with our own principal conservation officer, so that's why the application's been in a long time. There have been negotiations ongoing, so obviously we have we do our own internal heritage impact assessment as well. So yes, there was one submitted. It wasn't a very good one, so that that is correct to say, but we take advice from our own experts internally, and that's what we've done in this case as well.
Councillor Davison, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Who is it that decides when an area, in terms of manufacturing or light engineering, is expended?
Chair, I mean that's something that comes out in the local plan. So any new local plan decides on the specific areas. So that's after wide consultation with multiple parties. But it's the local plan that sets the land uses in principle for the different areas of the city.
I can see no more indications of members wanting to ask questions. So I'll open it up for comment. Councillor Davison.
Yes. When it comes to the decision on economic terms, we're not allowed, as planning, in the planning section, we're not allowed to make decisions on that. I personally think that any development which means that someone gains at the expense of somebody else is not a good decision. Now, in this particular case, we've got a change of use. And under that change of use, we can make these economic decisions. And I'm going to vote against it. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Price and I've got Councillor Nottage. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I find it very, very difficult. I mean, we're all proud of what's happening in Carr, and it's been transformed into a vibrant area from what it was a derelict industrial patch. But at the same time, I understand the importance of these small industrial units, and I think we have to make some decisions about where we're going to allow that to happen, still linked with the traditional area. Now, this building is quite a big building and it's nearly all empty, so I guess unless something's done soon, it'll start beginning to disintegrate. It's very old. So I'm still torn. I'm not sure I'm at a point where I can actually reject the planning application, to be honest with you, Chair. I think if we do, then I think it'll be difficult to sustain it on appeal, I guess. But even then, the building itself really does need some renovation. Having seen it yesterday, so I think I'll still support the recommendation, Chair, in spite of the difficulties. But I'm just hoping that we as a city can help to relocate these with grant aid into something very still in the Kelham area, because it retains that historical link with these sorts of industries. Yeah, so I think reluctantly I will support it.
Thank you, Peter. Henry?
Well, given the changing nature of Kelham, as other members have mentioned, and the dilapidated nature of the building, I feel it's inevitable that at some point this building is going to be redeveloped. Until we've taken the steps necessary to designate and protect an area solely for the preservation of our heritage crafts, I can't in good conscience approve a change of use on this building.
Sophie, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I also can't in good conscience vote to approve this. I think they were very strong opposition to this already from the two speakers, and reading through this as well. The local members have also raised that Kelham has avoided serious criticism of gentrification in the past, and I think this would potentially be that. Personally, my personal opinion is this set of buildings may eventually be redeveloped and may need to, but like Councillor Nottage said, not until we've actually done something about that and designated an area for craftspeople that have made our city great in the past. At the end of the day, I don't think any developer would actually want to be developing this site if it wasn't for the silversmith and the other people who've worked there for the past couple hundred years. I don't think Kelham would ever have been the kind of affluent, fashionable area it is without them. And in regards to the housing need, I mean, politically I disagree that there is a need for more housing. I think it's more affordable housing. But after looking at the images of this proposal, I wouldn't actually even say that this is high density, they're just small. And it seems far more efficient, and we've got far more efficient developments going on in the city centre in the future and in the past that provide better units than this one. So I also wouldn't want to approve this.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wetherall. Gary?
Hi, thanks, Chair. It's very difficult. I understand people coming in and wanting to keep these buildings. As Peter and Henry have said, you know, it's only 40%, you know, what's occupied. And we've seen in my own village, in Greneside, we've got a schoolhouse, the old school, being boarded up, got planning permission and everything, that's lapsed now. The roof's caving in, and on down the road here, the old town hall, we've got a massive problem with that. The city has. All over you see these buildings come empty or over 0.5% empty and start getting in a bad state. So we never are, Chair, and I'm going to have to vote with this. Thanks.
I have Vicky wanting to come in at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points that I wanted to make, Chair. It's just a reminder about the tilted balance that's in play here, because we don't have the 5-year housing land supply, and this is an application for housing. So the details of that is in paragraph 11. And let me just pull that up, if that's okay, just to remind members what that says. So it's paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework. So it's just to say that so when this isn't a 5-year housing land supply, we need to be granting permission unless either the application of policies in the framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide a clear reason for refusing development, or any adverse impact of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework as a whole. So just really wanted to remind members about the tilted balance. But also, Chair, when members have been discussing their comment regarding refusing the application, there has been a couple of references to designating areas of industry elsewhere, and on that basis they're inclined to refuse the application. Obviously, there has been a question asked here today about what the draft plan that's currently out for consultation says about designating industrial areas. Therefore, it could be an option for members who are thinking of refusing relating to that to actually ask for a deferral for further information regarding what the draft local plan says about industrial areas going forward, because there is a concern that if we do move, end up with a refusal reason that relates to something about designating areas in the future, when there is some information out there that we don't currently have before committee, it could be a risk. Therefore, it is something for members to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for your timely intervention. I've got Councillor Basharat. You good?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I understand, the development and the need of houses, especially affordable houses, but I strongly feel that, at the cost of any business or anybody's livelihood, and I think as a council we should be mindful and supportive, even more so in the current climate. I'm already speaking and working with families and businesses who are going through and where they've had to close down, and I think somewhere maybe I'm wrong, we do have a duty of care. So on those basis I feel it is a hard one. We understand if there are buildings that need renovating, improving, I totally understand that, but I feel that we should be really supporting the existing businesses rather than putting them further into more difficulty. So, yeah.
Thank you. I have also got Councillor Hunt. Tom?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for everyone who's spoken today. A couple of comments. One is on the affordability. I understand that it falls underneath the 15 units that are required, but I do find it, in order to then have a affordable quota, but I do find it disappointing that the developer hasn't brought that forward. That's just a separate comment. I think there is a wider issue about how we understand heritage in the city, really, and in this authority. It seems that the weight that is given to the word heritage is very much a backwards-looking agenda designed to steer things towards the museum, when actually heritage needs to be forward-facing. It's a living, breathing part of our city, and it should be, as we think about the future. So I think in terms of how we, this committee, this authority understands heritage and designates areas to be heritage assets, it should be a forward-facing concept that we have in our minds. And then lastly, Chair, I'd ask for your consideration of the suggestion by the Legal Services Officer for the deferral in light of the local plan and what that does for this application. I'd welcome a further comment on that, because I think it was a useful intervention for this conversation.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a proposal there that we defer this item to receive a report on the effects in this area of the local plan. I've got a seconder for that. So at this point, I think all of the comments on the vote are moot, and I'll take a vote on the deferral first of all. Yeah. So it would probably be appropriate to go around the room. What I'm asking you to vote for or against, or indeed abstain on, is the proposal that we've got to defer this item to allow us to consider the effects of the local plan in the area. Is that a fair wording, Vicky? Yeah, okay. So, Councillor Nottage.
Clarification on the deferral, please, Chair. My understanding is at present, because it's early in its emerging status, we are to afford the local plan minimal weight. Are we deferring until the completion of the local plan and its adoption, or until its further consultation at a point where we can give it greater weight in this proceeding?
Thank you. I'll refer that across to Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. My concern here is that the question was asked about what the local plan says in respect of industrial areas, and when members made comments about why they were considering or minded to refuse this, it was because they weren't sure what the proposal was for industrial areas going forward. It seems to me that if a reason for refusal that may be on the cards in the future relates to information that could be before committee but currently isn't, it would be sensible to defer to get that information. I'm certainly not suggesting, and nobody would do, that it would be reasonable to defer this matter until the local plan was adopted or furthermore. If the matter is deferred for this reason, we'll be coming back with a supplementary report detailing what is in the local plan regarding industrial areas, and I would seek to liaise with the officer to clarify what weight can be given to the draft local plan at that time. Thank you, Chair.
That sounds to be appropriate. So we're not deferring until the adoption of the local plan, but until such time as we can receive the information that members in actual fact said that they would like to receive. Is that okay? Is that acceptable?
If we're currently not able to accord the local plan any weight, is the contents of the local plan material?
That is a conversation for members at that time.
Okay.
So are you in favour of the proposal to defer for the reasons as set out? Councillor Nottage.
No.
Councillor Price.
Yeah, I'm going to support it, Chair. I think we need more information about the plan and where we're heading for before we take a decision. So I want it to come back in when my officers got that sort of advice, really, Chair. I'll support the amendment.
Councillor Hunt.
Yes, I will support this. Thank you for the suggestion.
Councillor Downs.
For a deferment, Chair.
Councillor Basharat.
Yeah, I support that.
Councillor
No, Chair.
Weddell. No. Okay. That was a no. That was a negative. Councillor Weatherall.
Yes, it was, Chair. So.
Councillor Wilson.
No, Chair, I don't support.
Councillor Davison. Councillor Woodcraft.
For the deferment, Chair.
And Councillor McCann.
For the deferment, Chair.
Right, so that deferral is carried, and we look for officers' recommendations as to the wording of that, and for a timely return of the report. Thank you very much. The final application we have on the agenda to hear today is application number 20/02550/FUL, a full application for land part of the Outokumpu site between Fife Street and Blackburn Road, and storage land at Grange Mill Lane, Sheffield, S9. The report starts on page 131 of the agenda, and while officers are shuffling around and getting themselves ready to prepare this report, I'd like to bring Councillor Weatherall in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've really declared an interest in this, Chair. I've signed a petition in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So you're taking no further part in the meeting. I thank you for your contributions today, and tell you can go home. Jacob, are you fit?
I don't know about that, but I'm ready.
Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this application is for area of land in the Blackburn Valley industrial area. The application is for enabling works only, with a view to facilitating future employment development. So the main elements of the enabling works will be the creation of a new vehicular access route from Blackburn Road, the formation of new site profiles, flood mitigation works including the realignment and deculverting of parts of the Blackburn Brook and extensive associated landscaping. The application is being presented to Planning Committee as a major strategic development and due to significant public interest in the proposal. We've received 30 objections overall, and that's including objections from active travel and wildlife campaign groups, from local politicians and from community groups, including the Love Winkerbank campaign, Winkerbank Connect and the Brendan Ingle Foundation. And we've also received 2 petitions through change.org. They're not considered to be valid petitions according to the Council's guidelines because they don't include the addresses and signatures of contributors. One of them is also a resubmission of a petition which was submitted against a previous 2019 application for just the access road, and that was a withdrawn application. So those petitions can be only considered informally. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the site's located just to the west of the M1 within the Blackburn Valley industrial area. It's bound by Grange Mill Lane and Blackburn Road to the east, the railway line leading to Barnsley to the west, and Fife Street to the south. So to the west of the railway line is the Woolly Woods, and then the Winkerbank residential area to the southwest of that. The site can be broadly divided into 2 parcels. So the first parcel is parcel 1, which is the sort of teardrop-shaped longer section, which is the majority of the site. And that's the former Outokumpu steelworks site, which is now vacant and covered in hard-standing still with significant overgrowth and self-seeded vegetation. Parcel 2 is currently in use as a crane storage site, and that's the bit just sticking up from parcel 1 to the north. And the Royal Oak, sorry, can we just go back still? Thank you. The Royal Oak pub is the small section that's excluded from parcel 2 at the southeast corner. On the aerial image, you can see what was a former railway line in addition to the one that's still active, which leads across the eastern side of parcel 1. That's now the NCN 67 cycleway, which forms part of the Transpennine Trail. There's also another public footpath crossing through the site via a footbridge across parcel 1 and then leading through to Blackburn Road. That's the SHE 391 public right-of-way footpath. The total site area is just under 14 hectares. There's also the Blackburn Brook running through the site. So that goes along parallel to the cycleway along the eastern edge of parcel 1, and then it's then diverted through parcel 1, and it's that straight line that you can see towards the south side of parcel 1 against the eastern edge. So that's where it's been heavily engineered and straightened as part of the former industrial use. The site's located in a general industry area as set out on the Unitary Development Plan proposals map. The draft local plan proposes the site for employment allocation. So in policy terms, employment development is a preferred land use, and so the enabling works can therefore be supported in principle. But the site is located within flood zone 3AI, which means it's a previously developed floodplain, and it's subject to frequent flooding from the Blackburn Brook. Next slide, please. So I'll guide you through some site photos later in the presentation, but I'm just going to show the application drawings first so that you can better understand the context. So you can see in this site master plan the new access road, which would come from Blackburn Road, and I'll explain that in more detail later. Along the eastern boundary, a new landscaped floodplain would be created around the Blackburn Brook to store floodwater and protect future development from flooding. You can see there that the channel of the Blackburn Brook is altered to a more natural form with removal of engineered banks, culvert and bridges, so that would improve the flow of the brook and achieve riparian enhancements in line with the Water Framework Directive. The flood mitigation would essentially reduce the risk to the rest of the site so that it becomes appropriately developable. But I would highlight again that the actual eventual buildings aren't included in this proposal. So what we have got though is land clearance and levelling works to create plateaus which would act as plots for new development. So you can see the 3 yellow rectangles in parcel 1 and then another plateau in parcel 2. And those would all be of appropriate height for flood resilience based on updated flood modelling. Finally, the development also involves substantial landscaping across the site, notably around the floodplain, along the access road, new hedgerow planting as well along the eastern edge of Parcel 1, and then new planting along the western boundary where there'd be additional retaining walls adjacent to the railway line. And overall, the environmental enhancement works would deliver a biodiversity net gain of 19.4% in habitat units, 189.19% in hedgerow units, and 12.98% in river units. Next slide, please. So this plan shows the proposed access road in a bit more detail. So there's an existing access point which is unadopted between the Royal Oak pub and the adjacent premises to the south. So this proposal would widen that existing access to create a new road curving around to utilise part of the existing crane storage land, with a surface water attenuation area to the south which would be integrated into the landscaping scheme. So that's that sort of wedge shape that you can see to the south of the access road. The road would lead first to an access coming off to the north leading into Parcel 2, and then to a roundabout which would provide access to the various development plots within Parcel 1. Because the eventual industrial or employment development isn't actually included in this proposal and it's just for enabling works, we've only got high-level estimates of traffic resulting from the development at this stage, but the access road has been designed to withstand high volumes of traffic and is considered by the Highways Department to be safely designed and with appropriate sight lines. There would be new pedestrian crossings on Blackburn Road and Grange Mill Lane, and they would be highlighted to assist with traffic calming, along with new signage along Blackburn Road and Grange Mill Lane, highlighting the entrance to the estate. And again, that's designed to the satisfaction of Highways, although the northern pedestrian crossing, which is just north of the junction with New Dropping Oil Road, you probably can't quite read it there, but it's highlighted in an orange box, and that the specific design of that would be subject to condition. To the bottom left-hand corner of that image, you can see a purple dotted line. That represents the NCN 67 cycleway, which forms part of the Transpennine Trail. And the access road design includes a pedestrian and cycle crossing to ensure that trail users can pass safely across the access road at that point. So many of the objections to this proposal have raised concerns over the fact that the access road bisects the trail. We do acknowledge that that's not an ideal situation, but the reason for that is that it's really the only option to facilitate development of this strategic employment site. So currently Parcel 1 can only be accessed from Fife Street at the south of the site, and that's inadequate for modern HGVs due to the low bridges under the railway line and also the Transpennine Trail, which obviously being a former railway line, that sort of reads as a railway bridge as well. So these bridges restrict visibility and also have height restrictions, and then they'd, for those reasons, likely cause safety issues, and they're quite narrow as well, the roads underneath there. So really the access road from the east is essential to meet employment land needs. There's no other option because to the west you've got the Woolly Woods and the railway line. In terms of safety, the design of that pedestrian and cycle crossing has been amended to a segregated pedestrian and cycle crossing design, and that's now fully compliant with LTN 120 cycle standards. There'd be plenty of warning signs for all trail users and road users to ensure that speeds at the crossing point are slow enough to avoid any hazards. And the transport assessment sets out that a vehicle would be expected to clear the crossing in no more than 2.5 seconds, so that would cause only a very minimal delay to a walker or cyclist. To the northeast of the Transpennine Trail is another public right-of-way footpath, and that's represented by the yellow dotted line on that plan. That would be widened to the south of the access road where it leads towards Blackburn Road, to create an enhanced pedestrian and cycle connection to Blackburn Road. Again, that would be in compliance with LTN 120 guidelines. You'll see later on from the photos that that footpath is quite informal, particularly where it's located to the north of the proposed access road, and it's barely perceptible, in fact, but it would be upgraded and there'd be a new accessible kissing gate connection suitable for mobility areas, mobility vehicles, to connect to the new pavement. So overall, Highways now consider that the access road design would be safe for all users, and the minimal disruption to the Transpennine Trail is fully justified. It's also worth noting that the trail would ensure excellent active transport connections for future employees working at the eventual development, and the landscaping works along the eastern edge of Parcel 1 would provide enhancement to the environment along the rest of the trail as well. Next slide, please. So finally, in terms of design drawings, this slide shows some cross-sections of the proposed landscaped floodplain along the Blackburn Brook. So what you can see is in each section, the dotted line shows the existing engineered bank, which would be removed, and that would create a permeable landscaped basin for floodwater storage. There's also a proposed balancing pond at the southern end of the site, which provide further attenuation along with riparian landscaping and habitat creation. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through some photos to contextualise the proposals. So on this one, photo 1 is taken from Blackburn Road, looking towards New Droppingwell Road, which passes under the M1. And that's probably where the majority of vehicle traffic would come to the site from, because it's the connection from the M1 roundabout junction 34. And then photo 2 is looking at the Royal Oak, which is next to the site entrance. Next slide, please. These 4 photos are all of Parcel 2, the crane storage site. So photo 1's taken from next to the Royal Oak looking into the site, and then the rest of them are taken from along Grange Mill Lane. And you can see the site boundary delineated by the palisade fence. So photo 1 here shows the land that would form the new access, so that's currently unadopted. And you can see the adjacent premises in that photo. And just along from there, it's a bit of a magnet for fly tipping, so obviously the land would be tidied up. Photo 2 shows the SHE 391 footpath, which runs along the south of Parcel 2. So that would be widened, and the palisade fence on the right-hand side of that photo would be removed to widen that past to 3 metres. Photo 3 is the crane storage site, Parcel 2, and that's taken from the footpath. Photo 1 here is looking to the south-east at the Blackburn Brook. Photo 2 is actually the SHE 391 footpath, as it then turns to run along the southwestern edge of Parcel 2. So it really just appears to be integrated with the vegetation, but actually between the low fence posts on the left-hand side and then the palisade fence on the right-hand side, that is an adopted public right-of-way. And there'd be a new accessible kissing gate connection at that point. And then photo 3 is looking towards Parcel 1, which is just behind the railings. And in front of the railings, that's where the crossing point would be, with the roundabout then beyond that. Then photos 1 and 2 are both showing the Transpennine Trail here, looking north and south along it from where the crossing point would be. Photo 1 here shows the entrance to the footpath as it bridges over Parcel 1. That's currently closed for health and safety reasons. And then photo 2 is the Victorian culvert of the Blackburn Brook at the point where the crossing would be. And these are 2 photos of the Blackburn Brook just against as it runs parallel to the Transpennine Trail. Photo 2, you can see some sort of heavy concrete engineering that's been installed over the years. That would be removed because it's currently causing some blockages to the brook. So these 4 photos are showing the character of the northern edge of Parcel 1. So photo 1's looking at the northern extent. Photo 2, you can see some of the concrete structures that remain on the site, and then photos 3 and 4 are showing from both the north and the south that closed public footbridge. Photo 1 and photo 2 here are now showing the Blackburn Brook as it runs through Parcel 1. So here's where it starts to become very heavily engineered with man-made banks and bridges. And then photos 3 and 4 are showing more the character of the centre of Parcel 1. So hard standing with self-seeded tall rudderals and scattered scrub. And then photo 4, you can see broadly the alignment of the previous estate road through the Outokumpu steelworks. And that same alignment would be, as shown on the master plan, the route to future development plots. And then these photos are all just showing more areas of the brook within parcel 1. So artificially straightened with man-made engineered banks and concrete structures and bridges, generally quite dilapidated, in need of renaturalisation and landscaping. These photos are showing more of the centre of parcel 1. So photo 1's looking towards the west where the railway line is. Photo 2's showing the centre of the site with the crane storage in the background. Photo 4 is just where there's a weir, which will be removed again, and some litter in there. Next slide, please. So photo 1 here, that hard standing would all be removed, and that's where the new essentially surface water attenuation basin would be, the balancing pond. So that would become essentially aquatic habitat. Photos 2 and 4 show the railway bridges on Fife Street. So it's those low bridges that make it impossible to achieve an acceptable vehicular access point for HGVs from the south of the site. And then photo 3 is just looking at the site from the south on Fife Street. Photo 1's showing the corner of the southeast corner of the site, and photo 2's just looking back up along Blackburn Road. And then finally, these 4 photos are taken from the western side, from the other side of the railway line. So you can see the railway line and the footbridge in the foreground, and then the application sites behind those in the background. So in summary, the proposal would bring major economic and social benefits through enabling substantial future employment development, as well as achieving a significant biodiversity net gain and improvements to a key watercourse with flood risk mitigation. The crossing over the Trans-Pennine Trail is necessary to achieve these benefits because of the inadequacy of the existing site access. But the crossing has been designed to a high standard to ensure safety and to minimise disruption to the trail users. So our recommendation is for approval. Aspects such as traffic generation, air quality and the appearance of eventual buildings would be considered further during subsequent applications for future development phases. And then just turning to the supplementary information, there's 2 things to note here. The first one is that there's a mistake in the wording of condition number 8. So that was some kind of software error where WSI, which is Written Scheme of Investigation for Archaeology, was automatically corrected to Wintertree Software Incorporated every time. So we've just corrected that. And then the other thing in the supplementary is that we've had an additional consultation response from Yorkshire Water to clarify that their objection is removed, subject to condition 7. Other than that, there's no other supplementary changes to the report or conditions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for the extensive photographs, because we couldn't get onto the site because it was in such a parlour state. I have a number of speakers to this application. I will call the speakers against the application first. Bridget, you're the first speaker. If you'd like to come... Oh, hang on just a second, Bridget. Comfort break. Yeah. Bridget, if you'd like to make yourself comfortable, but I won't start the clock running on your speech until we've had a very brief comfort break. That's it, you're connected to the webcast and the microphone. The floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Chair. I'm asking the committee to refuse this application because neither the council nor the applicant have followed the community consultation procedures for major developments in 3.20, the added value test of the council's statement for community consultation adopted on the 29th of July 2020. The development site is on the Sheffield-Rotherham boundary and is sandwiched between 2 residential areas, Winkerbank and Blackburn. It will involve substantial changes to the topography of the development site, creating noise, dust, vibration, traffic and light pollution. These are all material planning considerations and need to be addressed before a decision is made, not afterwards. The proposed development site is bigger than Meadowhall. It is located a few minutes walk away from the Meadowhall Transport Interchange car park, and then, as you've seen, it extends up to and including the Christmas Crane site, which can be seen from the M1. The sheer scale of the development only became apparent with the publication of the Planning Committee report last week. There are 15 pages of conditions before a building can be put on that land. In addition to decontamination, major excavation work, concrete piling, the land is functional floodplain. In order to overcome the issues with flooding in this site, the applicant has to raise the level of the land across the site over 30 feet by building the 4 sequential plateaus. 30 feet is the height of a 3-storey house. The 4 warehouse distribution centre sheds will eventually sit on top of the plateaus. In response to Yorkshire Water maintaining their objection, which they subsequently removed due to lack of site surveys, Sheffield City Council responded with, and I quote, "As a local planning authority, we are in a difficult position as this application has been delayed several times and we need to finalise our recommendation next week in order to meet the deadline for the Planning Committee meeting. This application is critical to bringing forward one of the largest employment allocations in order to meet the city's needs." End quote. In the Council's original scoping opinion for the full development, including the buildings, it said that an environmental impact assessment was needed, but it was unlikely that the development could be mitigated because of the surrounding road infrastructure. It is constrained by the M1 and the railway on the other side. So now the development of the site is being approached on a piecemeal basis. The planning report says that we are not allowed to talk about the impact of the whole site, i.e. what will be the Meadowhall of the distribution centre world, because that's not before you today. But the council are allowed to talk about the whole development even though there's no information on the economic benefits for the city, jobs or otherwise in this report. Do you see the hypocrisy here? It feels like one rule for the council and another rule for the residents. Imagine Meadowhall built on a 30-foot plateau. You're being asked to approve the 30-foot plateau today without any information on when or how that will be achieved or mitigated. There are no time scales in any of this. We are not opposed to development. We are opposed to Sheffield City Council giving the applicant a blank cheque for what happens next. Because once you approve this, there will be no public scrutiny. The burden of responsibility will be with the council to make sure that the applicant delivers the 15 pages of conditions listed in your paperwork. And we all know the council does not have the resources to do that. The public right-of-way, SHE 391, across the development site has been closed for nearly 2 years, while the council takes legal action against the landowner to reopen it. That in itself speaks volumes. If British Land submitted this planning application for their Meadowhall and warehousing distribution sites, everybody would know about it. No box would have gone unticked. There would have been extensive community engagement because British Land and Meadowhall are good neighbours to the residents of Winkerbank. Yet here we are with this current application to approve a construction site for major development with a footprint bigger than Meadowhall and no information about what happens next. There is a rush to approval for city growth with no evidence of when or how that will be achieved. City growth does not supersede a democratic process, the tenets of which are fairness and transparency. You wouldn't do this in S17, so we are asking you not to do it this way in S9. Either everybody matters in this city or nobody matters. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. The next speaker I have is Andrew Nice. Andrew, if you'd like to come forward and take your seat, make yourself comfortable, and the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
I just want to focus on whether due process has been followed. Under the pre-commencement conditions that start on page 132, let me just go through them. No development should commence until the following 8 reports have been submitted in writing to and approved by the local planning authority. The construction environmental management plan. The reason for that, in the interest of the amenity of the locality and the occupiers of the adjoining property. three linked reports, the preliminary risk assessment report, the phase 2 intrusive site investigation report, the remediation strategy report, all linked to this point. The reason for them, in order to ensure that any contamination on the land is properly dealt with, the site is safe for the development to proceed, it's essential that this condition is complied with before the development is commenced. The next report, no development shall commence until a phasing strategy for the development for the investigation of existing drainage infrastructure and for the provision of appropriate drainage infrastructure for each part of the site has been submitted to and improved in writing by the local planning authority. This has been the one that's been subject to correspondence that Bridget has already talked about. My challenge here is, has this report, has the stuff in this that's required in this report actually been done, or are we cutting corners here? The reason for the report, in the interest of sustainable development, and given that drainage works are one of the first elements of site infrastructure that must be installed, it's essential that this condition is complied with before development commences in order that the proposed drainage system will be fit for purpose. Do we want another flood problem in Sheffield in a few years' time because this was not followed? A written scheme of investigation. This relates to, why is this important? To ensure that any archaeological remains present, whether buried and part of the standing building, are investigated in a proper understanding of their nature, date and its significance gained in an archaeological investigation. Why? Because if you don't do it, it's irreversible. There was a Roman fort on the top of Winkerbank Hill. An ancient British tribe lived in the area. That's a riverbed. There could be archaeological remains there. That needs to be properly investigated. No development shall commence until full details of the measures to protect the existing trees and hedgerows to be retained as investigated. Reasons, in the interest of protecting the identified trees on the site, it's essential that this condition is complied with before any works on the site commence. There's a bit of repetition here, isn't there? It's essential, it's irreversible if we don't do it. Right. The interest of a biodiversity report, the reason, in the interest of protecting the biodiversity of the site, it's essential that this condition is complied with before any works on the site commence. Right, the people of Sheffield, particularly the people of Shire Green and Brightside, they have earned the right, historically, to have these things done properly. Let's do the right thing. We're not against development, as Bridget has developed. You know, Alfie, we just talked about earlier about the steelworks in Sheffield. You know, let's get this site developed properly, so it's an asset to the whole community and it's done properly. That's what I've got to say. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. The last speaker is Johnny Nelson. Johnny, would you like to come forward to the central console? The speaker is already on, so make yourself comfortable and you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Johnny Nelson. I'm here today to speak up for the thousands of people who will be affected by this major development on their doorstep. While I do not live in the area, I did for a short while and spent much of my life has been spent here through my boxing career and doing community work with Brendan Ingle, which is still ongoing, and even though he isn't. In about 2010, when the Outokumpu site came up for sale, Brendan tried to get the money together to buy it for the city of Sheffield. He wanted it to be turned into a wetland nature reserve. Now, some of you may be laughing at the thought, given the whole site is covered in concrete, but it had Blackburn Brook running through it. It had flooded for generations. It was and is a functional floodplain. Nature had the upper hand, and you have to work with what you got, is what Brendan would say. However, while the site was sympathetic, they would not delay the sale. They had constant problems on the site with people stripping cables and taking them into Woolly Woods and on the Transpennine Trail to burn them to get the copper. The site was a liability, even with 24-hour security. They couldn't keep on top of what was happening. The police were fed up of dealing with the problems, and so they wanted rid of the land, and it was sold. But even then, Brendan wasn't deterred. He still believed something could be could come of it after all. Meadowhall and the transport interchange were built on old steelwork sites. The Winkerbank Medical Centre and Travelodge Hotel were built on a former scrapyard. All of these had improved Winkerbank and gave local people access to facilities and jobs where there wasn't before. So what is wrong with involving people in what's happening? If the site is going to yield economic benefits for the city and impact on development can be mitigated, where's the problem? Winkerbank is in the Brightside and Shire Green ward of Sheffield. It is 6th in the most deprived ward in the city out of 28. 37% of the residents are economically inactive. There are 23% of childhood obesity, 55% on 3 school meals, 19% black and ethnic minority, and 3% Roma. How on earth do you engage with the planning process, for example, if your first language isn't English? People want to know what is going on, because at the moment they don't. It's morally and ethically wrong to approve this application without fully engaging local people in the process. More than anything, they need to know that this development isn't going to make their lives any worse. And currently, they don't have that. In the same way that you, as a councillors, don't have the information on the economic benefits either. We are all in the dark as to what happens next. I'm asking the council to refuse this application and to give us all an opportunity to work together on this site to make it better for everybody concerned.
Thank you. Could I ask you to turn the microphone off, please, Johnny, before you... Thank you. Right. I have one more speaker on this application speaking in favour, and that's Lee Charnley. Lee, if you'd like to come forward to one of the central desks, the button on the console will give you access to microphone webcasting, and the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
I am Lee Charnley of the applicant Junction 34 Limited. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The application and consideration today relates to a series of site enabling works. It does not seek permission for any employment development. These proposals will be detailed in a future application when extensive public consultation will take place. We've been working with your planning department on this site for nearly 4 years. The endurance is proof of the considerable importance of this site for the city. There is certainly no rush to approve. It has been a daunting challenge to completely resolve the access, ecology and flood issues with the satisfaction of your planning department and the Environment Agency. But as you can see from the recommendation for approval, we have succeeded. We have maximised ecology and biodiversity. We have created a safe and inclusive entrance to the site with an upgraded foot and cycle access to the Trans-Pennine Trail. And we have fully addressed flood risk on-site and enabled the flood risk reduction off-site. It is regretful that this application has been misunderstood by many. To correct the previous speaker, the site will not be raised by 30 feet. It is 3 to 4 feet maximum on the site. That is a big misunderstanding. Thankfully, as members of the Planning and Highways Committee, you will be objective, and I'm confident that this objectivity will permit you to recognise the enormous benefits that this application will bring. The permission today will considerably improve access for all users of the Trans-Pennine Trail. This is done by creating a new designated cycle and pedestrian connection from Blackburn Road, and additionally, a permission will facilitate the replacement of the now redundant foot crossing from Ecclesfield Road within a new application. The new access from Blackburn Road replaces the main access from Fife Street, which is, as we've previously heard, is dangerous. Highways access over the Trans-Pennine Trail is common. By example, crossings on Grange Lane and Barrow Road are both less than a mile away, so users are very familiar with such crossings. The proposals deliver new signage, new safety barriers, traffic calming platforms, new pedestrian crossings and other road safety measures along Blackburn Road and New Droppingwell Road, all of which was agreed with the Highways Department and the Safety Audit Team, ensuring maximum safety for all. In specific reference to this site, the Friends of Winkerbank have stated that we are proud of our industrial heritage and cherish the synergy of the industrial and natural landscapes. A permission today will strengthen, not diminish, this local pride by allowing the creation of an Environment Agency-approved flood relief and ecology zone directly on-site, measuring 7 acres, immediately alongside a development platform, an employment platform. At present, the waterway is brick culverted and of a low ecological importance. We will remove the culverts and create a new stretch of meandering waterway immediately next to the Transpennine Trail, all of which will produce significant biodiversity net gain. Perhaps more importantly, however, this 7-acre zone will contain floodwaters directly on site. It will also lead to flood risk being improved upstream and downstream. The application site has been described by your planning colleagues as strategically important because bringing forward this brownfield site will greatly reduce the pressure to release greenbelt land. In reference to the emerging Sheffield plan, this application will deliver over a year's supply of employment land. This is a huge singular contribution within the city region, and the significance cannot be overstated. Earlier, you voted to defer permission to lose employment land in the city, and heritage was clearly, and employment is clearly important to you. Following the devastating closure of the steelworks site many years ago, this brownfield site has fallen into dereliction and is now blighted by fly tipping, theft, drug use, and antisocial behaviour. Now more than ever, with public funding pressures at a critical level, this is an unbelievable opportunity to use private investment and redress this dereliction to bring jobs back to the site, and in the process achieve a remarkable amount of biodiversity net gain, improve connectivity to the Transpennine Trail, improve road safety on Blackburn Road and New Droppingwell Road, and tackle the high flood risk directly on site. I would then like to summarise, but not by using my words, but those of your planning officer in his report to you today. Your planning department's professional and objective conclusions are that the works to the Transpennine Trail can be accepted when weighed against the considerable economic and environmental benefits of the proposal. The design of the pedestrian cycle crossing at the intersection point will ensure that walkers and cyclists are not put at risk and that any wait times are minimal. Key flood risk concerns have been overcome to the satisfaction of statutory consultees. The daylighting and realignment of a large stretch of Blackburn Brook together with an extensive landscaping scheme would deliver a substantial net gain for biodiversity. Your planners go on to say the proposed enabling works would facilitate future development of potential employment site of strategic importance to the city. Your planners conclude by stating that the proposals represent sustainable development in accordance with national and local planning policies. You have a truly unique and positive opportunity for Sheffield and Wincobank, and I respectfully ask that you support your planning department's recommendation to approve this application and vote in favour of granting permission today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Charnley. Could I ask that you turn the microphone off, please? I'm sorry, it produced a strange echo. Thank you. Right, I'm going to return to the officer now to ask if you have any comments on those objections and statements.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think the first couple of speakers were mainly talking about the extent of community consultation and sort of whether we've rushed to a decision, whether we've been thorough enough in having too many conditions. So in terms of consultation, we've advertised multiple times in accordance with the Development Management Procedure Order, and so we have followed all statutory requirements on that. I believe the consultation was also in accordance with our own statement of community involvement, although that is advisory rather than a legal requirement. So what we've done in terms of advertisement is we've obviously published it on the website, as we always do. We've had several site notices around the site multiple times. We've done press notices multiple times, and we've also notified a large number of neighbours, and then we've obviously consulted statutory consultees as well. In terms of Rotherham residents also being affected, we did consult Rotherham Borough Council and they had no objections. In terms of Yorkshire Water, so obviously they've removed their objection now. In terms of the drainage requirements, the issue is that we can't do full, or the applicant can't do full site investigations until planning permission has been granted, because the site investigations are reliant on other stages of the development taking place first. So there needs to be a way of them accessing the site. They need to remove existing concrete pads to see exactly where the sewer locations are, and that's all development that requires planning permission, so it has to be dealt with through a pre-commencement condition. And we've not put our standard condition on that. We've made it a much more onerous condition that ensures that things are properly surveyed in suitable phases. And that is a pre-commencement true precedent condition. So if any work was undertaken before at least the initial phasing plan for the drainage investigation was submitted, then that would be unlawful and we would have powers to enforce on that. In terms of environmental impact assessment, there's been a full screening and it's in accordance with the regulations for this to proceed without an environmental impact assessment. For future phases, there'd likely be additional screening because the transport and air quality matters might be more pertinent at that point. So that would obviously take place at future stages, and also at future stages there'd be the same level of public consultation that's happened this time. So, you know, if members were to grant planning permission on this occasion, that doesn't mean that the consultation ends there. If there are going to be any buildings on this site, eventually they will all go through their own consultation. The issue of the 30-foot plateau, I think that's already been addressed by the applicant. Could we possibly go back to the slide that showed the cross-sections? This is the slide after that one, yeah. So essentially, there's all of that land removal there of the engineered bank that would create a basin. And then in terms of the rest of the site, like the developer said, it's about 3 or 4 foot, and there are cross sections. I've not put them in the presentation because they're quite difficult to read from a distance. But there are cross sections on the application file that show that it's not a huge difference in terms of land levels. It's basically just to create those level plateaus. There's been some reference to kind of the consultation or the process that would be undertaken if it was a different applicant. The identity of the applicant or the motives of the applicant aren't a material planning consideration. We consider it on its own merits. So the second speaker, again, talking about the conditions. Essentially, it's for an application of this scale, it's a normal sort of set of conditions that you'd expect to see when there are so many technical issues to resolve. As I was saying with the drainage one, there's site investigation that needs to be undertaken that can't happen until planning permission has been granted because it would be unlawful, because it counts as development in itself. The same applies to aspects such as land contamination. Those conditions are there for a reason. The ones that are pre-commencement are there for a reason, and we can enforce those if any development took place without those being complied with. So essentially, you know, they're necessary to deal with the technical issues that are apparent on this site, and that's comparable to other nearby strategic industrial or employment developments. There's been a recent permission at Meadowhall with lots of similar conditions. The River Don District site, the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, they all have lots of conditions on them. So that's to ensure that all the matters are dealt with. So it's certainly not a case of rushing a decision through without the relevant assessments being done. Again, the planning application has to be assessed on its own merits. So alternative proposals for the site, you know, like a nature reserve, can't really be considered because you just have to assess what's in front of you. There was some discussion about issues with antisocial behaviour on the site and health deprivation in the area. I think getting the site developed and tidied up, a lot of new landscaping, biodiversity net gain, improved wildlife in the area, improved ecology, that all contributes to health. And, you know, if there were any future air quality impacts to be assessed at future stages, there'd be some sort of compensation from the amount of new planting proposed. I think that's probably everything that I can address from those comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Jacob. I do have Tom who's wanting to ask a question, but first of all, I'm going to take the extraordinary stand of asking a question from the chair, if that's okay. Given that a lot of the questions related to the process that we're going to follow, is there any conditional directive that we could put on to advise the developers to communicate with or work with the community organisation to take a proactive role in order to do further communication as a process to explain what's happening and to involve the community as the application develops? Is that a fair question, I think?
I think it's probably difficult to do that as a condition because conditions need to be reasonably related to this development. There's nothing to stop us doing it potentially as a directive. It wouldn't be enforceable, but we could put a directive on saying, you know, the local planning authority considers that it would be pertinent to involve the community in future discussions before future applications.
So I Thank you, Jacob. Yeah. So I leave that out there if any member, I'm chairing today, so I don't normally speak from the chair. So if any member of the committee is minded to ask for that directive. I have a question first of all from Councillor Hunt. Tom.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the speakers. My question relates to use of the Transpennine Trail and the comments that have been made about the perceived benefits for users of the trail and how this is an upgrade to put a road through it. And I just wondered, in the 4 years that conversations have been taking place between the planning department and the applicant, has there been discussion about if we accept that a road is needed, has there been any discussion about a bridge, a kind of very long, gradual bridge in order to maintain access across the trail? I'm not talking about flights of stairs for users on bikes or walking, but a very long, graded bridge to maintain the route of the trail. Has that, or anything like that, come up in the discussion around the access road?
Thank you, Tom. Over to you, Jacob.
Yeah, so I've not been involved through the whole 4 years. I've taken over as case officer in the past few months. I'm going to defer to Helen in Highways on that one, if that's okay.
Helen.
Thanks, Chair. No, I can say that we haven't discussed the building of a bridge to bridge the access road. The main issue has been that the crossing is in accordance with LTM 120, which is the local transport note, which we work to, and that is considered to be the case. As we say, it's not ideal that the road is crossing the Transpennine Trail, but there is a safe crossing, and we feel that that is the appropriate thing. But there has been no discussion of any bridge, no.
Can I just make an additional comment on that, Chair?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So obviously it's not been discussed and it's not been looked at in any detail, but what I would say is that would be quite a substantial engineering operation, and potentially that would require more removal of trees and vegetation that runs alongside the trail. So I think that's just something to consider in terms of whether that would be the right approach.
The next indicator I have is Councillor Wilson. Sophie?
Thank you, Chair. It was two things. I am confused about the consultation and the allegations that we didn't meet our own requirements. It seems to be, I think it was the first speaker, Bridget, mentioned something that I'm not aware of, something that we passed in 2020, which from your remarks, Jacob, seems to be going above and beyond the legal requirement. So I'm confused where the discrepancy is there. So I'd just like that clarifying. The other thing is I just wanted to mention air quality. I'm not sure it's been touched upon that much. I'm confused when an air quality assessment would happen. Are you saying that would happen at the same stage as the draining, which you've talked about, so after the access? Just because it is mentioned as something that we should give significant weight to, and it's quite a local topic at the minute. You know, we've had lots of discussions around CAS and why that's needed, and time and time again, as we've been discussing that as a council, this area has come up and it is mentioned in the objections, the excess deaths due to air quality in that area, and it does feel like something that we you know, as a council, we keep saying it's because whilst we might have overall some areas with good air quality, areas like this are falling far below standards. So I'm very concerned about that as well, especially without the economic benefits on the table for us right now.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first point about consultation. So the Development Management Procedure Order sets out statutory requirements. The council has its own statement of community involvement. It's not necessarily more onerous on the requirements, it's just expanding it in terms of detail. I don't know specifically which areas the speaker felt hadn't been met, so I can't really provide any further comment on that, but we have certainly met all the usual consultation requirements that we do for every application. In terms of air quality, so the issue with this application in itself is that it's just for the enabling works. So any air quality impacts will be at the operational phase only when the development's being undertaken. There won't be, sorry, at the development phase only. There won't be an operational phase because the application doesn't include the eventual employment development. So the main air quality assessment for the lasting air quality impacts would come at future application stages for, say, individual buildings. In terms of the air quality during the construction phase, that's dealt with through condition, I think it's number 3. I'll check that. Yeah, condition 3, so that's construction environmental management plan. So that deals with a whole range of issues about protecting the community during the construction phase, and air quality is very explicitly included in that. So for the construction phase, air quality is dealt with through condition 3. For the operational phase, that would be reliant on future applications, but it would be fully assessed, and it would be a matter that would be considered in environmental impact assessment screening as well.
Okay. Lucy wants to come in here as well.
Chair, I think it's just in relation to Bridget's comment about the statement of community consultation. I think what the speaker was talking about was the applicant hasn't engaged with the local community rather than the council. So the council has carried out its own statutory procedures. In the statement of community involvement, there's an encouragement that on big schemes, the applicant should do drop-in sessions, whatever it might be, and that's the type of thing that British Land obviously do, which Bridget's familiar with. So we can only encourage that, but we can't insist on it. And I think the point that the chair was making about a possible directive to say that, should this application be approved at future points, the council recommends that you engage with the community. I think that's what Councillor Hurst was getting at. So it's the bit that's the non-statutory part that the applicant hasn't done, but I'm sure they would be willing to do so at future phases should this be approved. That was my understanding of what the speaker was talking about.
I think that was mine as well, Lucy. So that's why I talked about the directive. I have Barbara indicating and Pete. So I'll bring you in first, Councillor Marston.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it was a comment about the Transpennine Trail where it crosses the new access road. Because on page 173, the one thing that sort of sent up warning signals to me was vehicle speeds are anticipated to be low at around 20. But I can't see from the plans how you can guarantee that they will be that low. And we know full well that there's always the cyclist who guns towards a crossing regardless, and we always know that there's a motorist who thinks that they have right of way regardless. So are there, how is the crossing adjusted to ensure that the speeds are low, preferably lower than 20 at that point, to reduce the chance of accident?
Okay, thank you for that. That would
Thanks,
be
Chair.
Helen?
It wouldn't particularly be the crossing that was adjusted. It's actually the design of the access road, which I think if you saw it did have a bend in it, which obviously is better than a straight route. So that's meaning people are manoeuvring slowly. Obviously, as they're coming in the opposite direction, they're coming around a roundabout. So again, they're going to be manoeuvring slowly. And actually just the length of the road as well, as I say, when you're coming round the bend, you're then not going to be speeding up as you come towards the roundabout. So it's really, it's what I would say, it's not an access road that we would think about putting traffic calming on or anything like that. So it really is the geometric design. Again, the fact that you've got an access, another access off the access road into, I think it's parcel 2. So I think it's just the general design of the access road that would limit the speeds. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's what's bothering me. There isn't enough in there to look at the design, but you're right. I mean, you've got to design in traffic calming, and I'd just like to see more detail about that, because it's human nature.
Okay, thank you. Pete, Councillor Pry.
Thanks, Chair. I want to question the statement about it that it'll be an improvement in jobs and the environment. We don't know what's going on this site. They're asking us to agree to a blank cheque. Now, it seems to me the demand is, because it's so near to the M1, the demand is going to be for a distribution centre of some sort on and off the M1 with lorries, etc. The developer can't tell us what's going to go on. Now, it seems to me the people who live in that area already suffer from air quality conditions with the M1 going straight through it. Are we not going to add a lot more air quality worse because of the vehicle it's going to attract, because of its nearness to the M1? And it's going to create very few jobs if that's what does win the day. And for us to agree to it without knowing what's going on there, surely it's asking too much of members, particularly when straight across the road is Woollywood ancient woodlands. I mean, it just seems an anathema for us to agree to this without some assurance what we're agreeing to, other than improving the ground mess that's been left by the industry. I understand that does need doing. But unless you can tell us what's going to go in its place, surely it's asking too much. Answer that.
Thank you. Jacob, would you like to try and unpick that?
Yeah, so obviously, you know, there are certain assumptions in the assessment, but employment land is generally, requirements for employment land are according to site area and floor space rather than a specific number of jobs. And this is a very significant site. It's one of the only sites of this size that hasn't already got some form of planning permission or development that's beginning. So it's kind of a piece of the jigsaw, I guess, in terms of Sheffield's employment allocation that we'd be beginning to meet. We'll obviously assess the benefits in terms of the magnitude of those with jobs as the applications come forward for future plots. What we do know is that we wouldn't be creating any jobs if the enabling works didn't go ahead, because the land wouldn't be developable. So we know that there will be some. There'll also be jobs created through the development phase. And then aside from the employment benefits, we've obviously got a huge biodiversity net gain and flood mitigation, which are the other benefits that enabled us to make this recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Nottage. Henry?
Well, Councillor Price has taken some of my words straight out of my mouth, which has saved you all a bit of my voice. But there's a few things. The representations from Cycle Sheffield and the Trans-Pennine Trail resulted in submission of amended drawings, which we think would be a big improvement. So I would like to thank officers for taking that into consideration. And assuming that all the maths have been done right on the flood attenuation schemes, the size of the balancing pond and the biodiversity net gains, these are all things to be applauded. And we have to weigh those up against what, as Councillor Price has alluded to, is an imaginary amount of traffic. The only thing in this application before us is the access road itself. And as you've mentioned, Jacob, it's been designed to facilitate heavy traffic. Part of our job in this room is to weigh up the development of the city and the proposals before us against the impact on local residents. And I find it impossible to do that without having some idea of what is going to be put on the site once the enabling works have been carried out. Given the scale of the development, I also find it hard to believe that somebody is going to carry out all of these works without an intended use for the site. And that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Is there a question in there?
I guess the question would be, would it be possible to have a proper conversation around the longer term use of this site with a longer term understanding of what is going to be put on the site once the enabling works are carried out?
I will pass it across to the officer for answer.
I guess our responsibility as a local planning authority is to assess the development before us. So we can only go on the information that we know. Like I said, we do know that it would facilitate some jobs. We don't know an exact figure yet. We do know that the intended use is for employment land, which is in accordance with all of our land use policies. And we do know that it would be delivering a significant biodiversity net gain and flood risk mitigation. So on that basis, we can still, make that recommendation. And even if the future development plots never came forward and this application stood on its own, or if it took a long time for those to come forward, you'd still have significant environmental improvements compared to what's there as existing. So looking at it on its own merits, it's still a positive overall, which has enabled us to make that recommendation.
thank you, Jacob. I find that is asking us to judge the balance with things only in one side of the scales.
Councillor Nottage, if I can just say, I know I can see that Lucy wants to come in, but this is an application for enabling works for access, clearance and remediation, and that is what we're being asked to consider, and that is all we're being asked to consider at the moment. I'll let Lucy come in here.
Chair, I was going to say exactly that, and obviously if the application is approved and these works go ahead, future phases would come again to this planning committee. So it's at that point that we'd be able to assess those full issues of traffic generation, air quality. Those are really important considerations for this area. We're fully aware of that. But we can't assess those now because we don't have them. We're only able to assess what's in front of us, and for the reasons Jacob has explained, you know, the recommendation is a strong recommendation in this case.
I've now got Councillor Basharat. Nicket?
Yeah, thank you. I think my questions have been raised, but just looking at the responses from the residents and people living there, you know, there's a lot of, is coming out, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that obviously we can all agree that it does actually cause fear of what happens, and obviously from experiences, people, you know, the trust element, it's that as well for me, to make sure that the residents and the people living locally, they are fully aware of what is coming in their area. And just listening to some of the speakers, I think it's made me a little bit concerned in terms of, you know, has the environmental impact assessment and health impact assessment being carried out on the whole, even though we're looking at enabling this work, but once the work is enabled, you know, what is, how far and what is on there, and having that close connection and consultation with the local residents who are going to be, you know, bearing the brunt, God forbid, if something wasn't working. Like we all know that once something has been put in place, it's very difficult and costly to come back to those things, and these are people living there. And I think when we're hearing more, and even on this report, there is all this coming out, and consultation, by all respect, I can understand that it's probably done in a fair way, but when local residents raise those concerns that we haven't been fully engaged or fully aware, I think it's only fair and right to be able to address those points, because those are the residents that are going to be living locally long term with all this. And I think that benefits both ways, the developer as well, just because if they're going to be in that area with this development, you know, it's that trust and element, being able to get on with everybody's rather than having more problems down the line. So for me, I think the residents' uncertainty, and I think it's very important to be engaging them fully, like the chair mentioned, some element to make sure that that follows through. Thank you.
Was there a question in there?
That the environmental impact assessment and health impact assessment, has that been carried out on the whole plan?
Thank you. I lost sight of that.
Chair, with every major development we have to do a screening under the environmental impact assessment regulations. So this particular enabling works development was screened. It doesn't need to be accompanied by an environmental statement. Future phases may well need to be accompanied by that, because a previous environmental screening that did talk about actually developing the site out, which never came to fruition, would have required an environmental statement, but just simply the enabling works phase was adjudged to not. That is covered in detail in the report. But at any future point, we have to make a further screening. As soon as there's if there was another phase, we have to screen that again and determine under the regulations whether an environmental statement is required. I mean, obviously this application was accompanied with a lot of technical reports that covered off those sorts of issues in any event, but in terms of the formal environmental statement, this application didn't require one. That's not to say that future phases will not, because they may well do, they may well trigger that requirement. I think in terms of the community consultation, obviously that keeps getting mentioned. I think the chair did mention a possibility of putting an informative on to encourage that. I don't think anybody's actually suggested that. I think you'd need to suggest it and get it seconded to add it into the mix. So whether somebody wants to do that, obviously is open to the floor. But that's, I think, how that would have to be handled, Chair.
Thank you, Lucy. The next question I have is from Councillor Dams. Tony? Right, I'll save it for... Okay, I'll save it for comments then. Is this a question, Councillor Nottage? Henry, could you put your icon, please?
Enabling.
If we had to grant a planning application for these enabling works and the developer would spend presumably a considerable sum carrying them out, would that be a material consideration for the granting of the next phase of planning?
Material in so much as obviously they'll have addressed some of the environmental concerns in terms of flood risk, so some of the major, so that part would be a material consideration because they're addressing those issues, but obviously they've still got other issues to address as part of any future application, so it's not a definitive that a certain type of development would be approved on there, because we still have to make that assessment in terms of the transport generation and the air quality issues, so we still have to make those assessments at the appropriate times.
Can't see indications for any more questions, so I'm going to go to comment, and I'll bring in Councillor Dams.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Price. We're in a difficult position here that we asked to give permission for a site that we've no idea what it's going to be used for. But I also think there's that many no development until this and until that and what have you. And I just think it might have been easier to come back with us for a decision after these things have been done, and perhaps a meeting with the community to reassure them about some of the concerns that they've raised. So I think it's very difficult to make a decision on it without knowing the future use and without knowing that the community is being properly informed about what's happening and what's taking place. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Masters?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I used to live up there, so I do remember it as it was when it was working steelworks and all the rest of it, and how the site has deteriorated since. And to be quite honest, what I'm looking at is the improvements that are possible through this sort of clearance work compared to what is there now. I think it's excellent that the river's being opened up. But I also think, you know, sort of cleaning up the environment considerably, even, you know, it's be a selling point for the site. At the moment, it's suggested in the documents that it's envisaged to be 30% manufacturing, 70% sort of warehousing, logistics. But with a nice, clean environment, it's a good selling point. And I don't think we can prejudge exactly what will be attracted to that site. I mean, you just think about Kelham Island 20 years ago. Who would have thought about its development now, or the Attercliffe corridor, you know? So by clearing it, making it attractive, improving it, it's not denying access to residents, and I do take the point about consultation, because I think that's absolutely key to every decision. That I actually think that with that and the transport links and the improvements potentially with this site and the need for having sort of employment land, then I'm in favour of supporting the application. Thank you, Chair.
Pete?
Thanks, Chair. To all get enabling decisions, it gives direction roughly where you want it to go. It set the pattern, and that's what worries me. This is a massive, massive site, and it's not just like for housing. This is going to be industry, and unless we take very careful, close watch over it, it's going to be something that we can't stop. Because of the closeness of the M1, it's so attractive for vehicles in and out, for those going And that seems to me a danger that this is going to be to the residents, because the other one, it's not just the industry, it's the closeness of people living nearby. The fact that across the road is one of the finest ancient woodlands, woolly wood, all onto it. That transparent trail is one of the best cycle routes in the north of the city. And it's not just for bikes, by the way. Any Saturday or Sunday you want to walk around there, you'll see families walking up and down, pushing prams, and little kids on tricycles. So it's more than that. It's a family attraction. And what we do in between that, and I understand it needs something doing with it. But at the moment, it don't look bad. It's been overgrown by vegetation. So until you get on the site, you don't see all this concrete and what mess. But something does need doing. But I'm just a fear that unless we have some direction of what it's going to be used for, because the developer must have some idea that someone to invest the money. See, I'm the only person here who was around when Meadowhall came along. And they actually brought us a model of the area. So we knew exactly what was going in, not just a plan and a theme. And so everybody who is on the old Hatfield's work site, we all knew what was going there. This is totally different. To agree something in abstract, we're just to put a road in. I fear it, Chair. And so I just think it'll worsen the air quality if you're not careful by more and more big vehicles being onto that site. So I can't support it, Chair, and I'm going to oppose it. Sorry.
Pete, I need to bring Vicky in here.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to reiterate what's already been said and what is in the report, that the future use of this site that is being discussed will be subject to further planning applications. And assuming that they will meet the terms of reference of this committee, they will come before this committee, in which case these issues that are being discussed will be considered at that point. And to prejudge those issues without knowing them and to refuse on this basis is a risk, and would be something that could be referred to in a cost application at a planning appeal in the future. And now, obviously, as you all know, the risk of a cost application for future appeal isn't a material consideration, but not having robust reasons for refusal is something that you need to take into consideration. And prejudging the future use of this site, despite knowing that it would be a future application for you to be considering this use at that time, would be a risk as I've described.
Could I just question that, Chair? What if one of the decisions was an environmental valley, but it's going to be pleasant, don't want any roads in, it's going to be walk-throughs, an attractive area? That doesn't you wouldn't need a roads building in it if it was going to be like another valley in our city, which has got attractive and environmentally attraction for all the people living in the area. That's another planning consideration, surely.
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. If this was a planning application that wasn't proposing to come back with another application to use the site for employment use, then yeah, obviously that application would just be for that use, and that it would be fine at that point. But that isn't the position. We've got this application. We need to deal with it on the merits that we've got before us, and that is for enabling works.
That would ruin it. The vegetation.
Peter, please let the officer speak.
Thank you. I think the planning officer's already detailed the biodiversity net gain that this would bring. So the problem with the position you're talking about is ruining it compared to a hypothetical position where it's already a park, for example. That isn't the case. As you know, it's currently a disused site. It's an strategic employment site for the city. So, as I say, just in terms of refusing on the basis of what will happen to this site in future, when we know that will be subject to a future application, is a risk, as I've detailed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, next comments are from Councillor Hunt. Tom.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to see the site full of employment, and I think that it will, as Councillor Master said, bring some environmental improvements. The flood restoration work, improvements to the Blackburn book are welcome, but I do have significant concerns about what we're being asked to approve today, and they centre upon the access to the Transpennine Trail. I'll quote page 172, it says that it's considered that careful design can ensure that the impact on the trail is limited and mitigated, retaining a safe and attractive active travel corridor. I agree that the Transpennine Trail right now is an active and attractive travel corridor, but I really think that putting a road through it means that that is greatly jeopardised and will harm the potential health implications, health benefits rather, from accessing the trail as it currently stands. And as people have highlighted, there is a need for greater health benefits in the local area, and I support more active travel, so I do have significant concerns about that. On the point about that this is enabling works, and so therefore we can't kind of prejudge what would come later, I'd take that on board, but I will just note that I do think that what is being put forward in those enabling works sows some pretty clear seeds about what might come in the future. For example, it is not a single lane access road that is being suggested could come off Blackburn Road. It is a road that's been designed for HGVs, which suggests the kinds of use that could come down the line. So I'm not, prejudging it based on what might come, but I feel like it is a relevant consideration, and it seems somewhat perverse that we would only consider air quality implications of a new road at the point when that road becomes operational, rather than at this stage. Now that's a planning policy question that is well beyond the sort of remit of this committee to consider, but it just does seem very odd that we have a road and a roundabout designed for HGVs, but we're not in a position to assess the potential air quality of that, rather than a smaller designed road. But I'll just leave it there, but I have significant concerns about what's being put forward.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Councillor Wilson. Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I share the concerns that have already been shared by the members. I do accept the officer's explanation that most of what we might be discussing is kind of out of the remit for today. I would like to express, I think this, as Councillor Price says, it feels very unfair. It feels like we are being asked to make a very, very big decision with very little evidence of what is to come next. Again, I understand why that is and the laws around that, so perhaps I'll not comment on that. But again, I also share the concerns about the active travel. I used to live in S9, I grew up there, and used to, actually when I lived there, there was far more areas to cycle and play and walk, and outdoor space. It was where the old airport was. There was fantastic green space. I'm not sure it was meant to be green space, but we used to go tadpoling and walking and cycling, amazing, all gone now, and I think that's very sad. So I do think something needs to be done with this land, but as Councillor Hunt says, I think it is clear what's going to happen. I'm not sure how much we are allowed to say. And I do think the residents of that area are residents that have, over the past few decades, continuously been asked to give up something for the greater good of the city, for example, employment and industry. Just going back to the air quality, because I do think that's a huge mitigating factor in this whole debate. But as one of the opposition, I can't remember what group it was, stated the 500 excess deaths, any road is adding to that, and no amount of employment, I know we don't know how much employment there is, but no amount of employment is going to make up for that, is it? So I do think this is a very, very difficult one. I've not been on planning that long, but perhaps the most tricky one that I've seen so far.
And the next speaker I have is Councillor Dams. Tony?
Yeah, I don't think we're prejudging anything. We don't, that's the point, we don't know. And I do think one of my main points really is that it's going to be a significant development, and the community's not really being consulted by the developer. And I think some of the concerns that people might have could have been properly addressed and perhaps reassured by a meeting with the developer. So I find it very difficult, and it's difficult not to draw inferences from the type of roads that people are putting in as what will happen. And I just don't feel it's appropriate making any decision at the moment, but that's just my view.
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the applicant has put in this planning application and is entitled to a decision. They're entitled to come forward with an application for enabling works and for the future use of the site to be determined by a future planning application, in which case the traffic and air quality impacts of those uses will be considered. At the current time, you haven't got the information regarding the traffic use or the air quality impacts of the final use of the site, because that isn't before you today. What is before you today is the design of the access, the remediation, the biodiversity improvements of the site. So just be mindful in terms of going forward with the vote of what, if you are minded to refuse, why you're refusing it, and to bear in mind that the future use of the site would be subject to further application and further consideration and further consultation with the community. Thank you.
I've got Councillor McCann. Bob?
Thank you, Chair. To be honest with you, I don't see where all this waffling about what might be, what could be, what should be. We don't know what's going to come in the future. What we've got is a planning application in front of us now. We've got to make a decision on that. And basically what we're talking about is a private company willing to invest money into a derelict site to improve it from what it is now. I take Peter, Councillor Price's view, yes, it could be made a nice valley and all that. Could be, Peter, but where's the money going to come from to do that? That's not going to happen. What we've got is a company here willing to put money into this, willing to clear up a derelict site, which has been derelict for an awful long time, a hell of a long time. But bearing in mind, we're talking about vehicle movements, aren't we? Let's face it, there was a lot of vehicle movements on there in the first place, you know, and so that's not going to change that bit. So, and quite frankly, as far as I can see, if we turn this down, taking Victoria's point of view, if we turn this down at this point, this will go to appeal. And given the response we've had so far from the planning inspectorate, it's going to get turned over. And the council will then no doubt end up having a bill to pay. So, you know, let's work in the real world now, living in the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McCann. And Vicky wants to come in on certain of your remarks.
Apologies, Chair, I don't want to beat the same drum, but I do just want to make it clear that the future cost application at a planning appeal is not a material consideration. The material consideration in this respect is if you are minded to refuse, have you got robust reasons for refusal that will stand up to scrutiny? So that's the thing that you need to be considering, not anything to do with any potential appeal and the costs that may come forward through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And I've got Councillor Basharat. There you go.
Okay, yeah, for me was also, it's for the developer as well, even though we're enabling this today's vote, and it is about looking at both sides and making sure that we don't bring in further issues and problems. So I think part of the planning is also to look at future stuff, not just looking at, yes, we'll enable this and that's it, all is peace. But I think with the developer, also having to, if this is passed, enabling the work, and then with the future applications that do come, even though they're going to come to this committee, we have to look at it. And again, wouldn't that also be an issue for the developer if they're not able to actually continue what their plans are for on that site for future stuff? It's again, if applications are rejected on many reasons or whatever is going to be put to us, it will be a difficult position for the developer as well. So I think these discussions are to make sure that the developer as well is protected, even though, yes, the site needs improving. This is a good application that's come forward, but we have to be mindful of the knock-on effect that it would have down the line on the local residents, as well as, you know, the developer not being able to actually go ahead with certain plans that they may have when it does come to here. So it's being mindful for both sides, but I think there is a lot of uncertainty here, and it has actually put us in a difficult situation to actually clearly say, yes, go ahead, but then whatever comes through, that's going to cause problems, could cause, and it's not about prejudging, it's a bit, again, looking beyond and looking at the environment we're in at the moment with the difficulties that we're facing, also from the council perspective and from the community and from the businesses perspective as well. So I feel it's not clear, but it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you for that, Nicola. I see no more indications of... Oh, sorry, Cliff. Councillor Wood.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a brief comment, really. I mean, people have made comments about air quality arising from traffic. As time goes on, the emissions from HGVs is improving. A higher proportion of Euro 6 and there'll soon be Euro 7 vehicles. In the future, there'll be electric. We're going to reach a point where emissions are much lower. So I just sort of throw that thought into the mix.
Thank you, everybody, for that debate. I now propose to proceed to the vote, and the application is a full planning application for enabling works comprising access, clearance, remediation, reprofiling, drainage, flood mitigation, landscaping and associated works. The officer recommendation is to grant conditionally, and I now propose to go around the room and ask members if they will be voting in favour of that recommendation, against that recommendation or abstaining.
I find myself unable to weigh up the benefits to the city in terms of employment land while simultaneously discounting the costs, so I choose to abstain.
Against, yeah.
Councillor Hunt.
I'm going to regrettably vote against.
Councillor Dams.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Basharat.
Unfortunately, against.
4. I hope that members that are voting against are also thinking about reasons, planning reasons for voting against this. Councillor McCann.
For, Chair.
Councillor Woodcraft.
For, Chair.
Councillor Masters.
For, Chair.
Councillor Davison.
Yes, I can't see any legal reasons to stop this under the planning laws. So I will vote in favour.
Councillor Wilson.
Against, Chair, on the grounds of there being the HGV access and the trail potentially no longer being safe and attractive.
Chair, could I just ask the Democratic Services Officer to confirm the numbers to me? Because I believe it will be 5 against and 4 for. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you. In that situation, Chair, you have not yet exercised your vote, and you do have the opportunity to use a casting vote as well. So there is a potential here for that to happen and for you to influence the outcome of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, Vicky. I haven't used my vote. I normally refrain from using a vote as chair, but I will vote in favour of the officer recommendation and my casting vote also. Thank you. So that takes a vote to 6 for, 5 against and 1 abstention, so that is carried. Thank you very much. And can I also comment here, I very much regret that none of you included my suggestion, very heavy suggestion about a directive on consultation. But I hope the developer's listening. Thank you. One more. Right, okay. We've got to the end of the actual planning applications. Agenda item number 10 is the record of planning appeals, submissions and decisions. I'm going to ask officers if there is anything we need to, any lessons we need to learn from this. Thank you very much for that. So I ask the meeting to note that application. Thank you. And the next, sorry, the meeting is being slightly disrupted because we need to go and let people out of the building. Thank you, Alan. The date of the next meeting is Tuesday, the 14th of March at 2 p.m. Thank you.